OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
It is 7:30 on this Tuesday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It is Owen and Will with you right the way through until 9:30 this morning, and we've got plenty coming up. We're going to be discussing how the GAA season is going to look over the next couple of months in the company of Donnchadh Boyle of the Irish Independent. That's at around 7:45. We're going to be reflecting on last night's Panorama documentary on MTK's relationship with Daniel Kinahan. Nicola Tallant of the Sunday World will be with us after 8 o'clock. The latest controversy surrounding Patrick Reed is something we've been covering for the last day or so. John Duggan is going to give his take on that at around 8:30 or 8:45 this morning, as well as his opinion on Gareth Bale and Jose Mourinho and what is happening at Tottenham Hotspur. And on that theme as well, Graham Hunter will be with us after 9 to discuss that, Lionel Messi and the swashbuckling and also defensively solid Atletico Madrid, who are running away with the La Liga title. We'd love to hear from you this morning. As I say, we're on air for the next couple of hours. You can tweet us at Off The Ball, or you can comment on the YouTube stream as well. Will O'Callaghan, good morning.
Morning, Owen. How are things?
Very well. So I think everybody was watching this Panorama documentary last night, seeing the ins and outs of this, seeing how the UK audience would actually receive this and what information they would get if they were coming to the story for the first time. But you were kind of dual screening last night. You were flicking between BBC and Sky Sports News because, of course, it was transfer deadline day.
Yeah, I was trying to keep an eye on both and also seeing if there was going to be any white smoke about the GAA season coming out from last night too. So Twitter was being scrolled while that documentary was on Panorama between 9 and 10. Possibly you're bringing the story around MTK and their involvement in boxing, and Daniel Kinahan being a kingmaker, particularly for some huge fights, including Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, the lineal world champion, coming up later this year, going out, as you said, to a much wider audience by being on the BBC last night. We'll just keep an eye to see really what was going to happen, both with Liverpool's defensive situation, Owen, where they needed to get bodies in at the back with the injuries that they have, and also the merry-go-round that some of those moves created for some other players. And again, some Irish players who really need some game time that got moves on the final day, including perhaps a little bit of a surprise one, Shane Long, who's found himself on the fringes at informed Southampton, got a move to Bournemouth, who badly need goals and a change around in terms of their fortunes in recent weeks, where they've dropped a bit off the pace but are still inside the promotion playoff spots in the Championship, despite not winning in their last 4 games. So he got a move on the back of Minamino going from Liverpool to Southampton. Again, Minamino, who didn't have a huge impact against Burnley off the bench last week for Liverpool, is another player who badly needs game time. But I think some of the papers have gone with Jurgen Schopp, I think is one of the headlines. And another one is he hails cab, given that he got 2 players in on the last day. I think, again, like Michael Edwards is going to get huge credit for what he's done with Liverpool here, because they had an outlay, I think, of £2 million in the end to get 2 players in. So both cases, the money is kicked down the road until this summer. So they didn't have to worry about paying a transfer fee at that point. And yet they've got Ozan Kabak, which is where the Hail a Cab headline comes from, and Ben Davies coming in from Preston. Ben Davies is maybe the big winner of transfer deadline day. He's never played outside the English second flight. Looked like he was going to go to Celtic, but then Liverpool were able to sneak in at the last moment, pay a fee of around £500,000. And Van den Berg, their young player from the Dutch under-21 team, has gone to Preston for the rest of the year. And at least now at this stage, they've got 2 defenders for this weekend. I'm not sure if Kabak and Davies will be involved directly against Man City, but with Liverpool's injuries, and particularly they were able to keep it under their hat while they were in negotiations with Schalke 04 and also with Preston. They then announced that Joel Matip will miss the rest of the season with ankle ligaments. So Liverpool were in desperate need of getting business done yesterday. A defender who didn't get a move on that I was interested to see if it would happen was Collins at Stoke, who looked like there was the potential for him to go to Burnley, but a deal couldn't be reached in the end. And Mustafi from your own club Arsenal, as part of the merry-go-round with Schalke moving Kabak onto Liverpool, Mustafi's contract was cut short. Arsenal have got a lot of wages off the wage bill this January, and he's gone to Schalke now on a free transfer.
Beautiful, beautiful morning. A smile etched across my face with O'Callaghan with that news about Shkodran and Mustafi. You mentioned the Michael Edwards angle here. There's no way that we're not going to be looking back on Ozan Kabak and Ben Davies' arrivals as like sub-master stroke in a year or two. We'll be scratching our heads saying, where did they come up with these guys? Where on earth were their scouts? And how did they manage to pluck these 2 guys out as they go on to become the next version of Van Dijk and Joe Gomez?
Well, yeah, we'll see if it goes quite that far. But no matter what, they needed to get senior defenders in. And if nothing else, to try and get some of their midfielders to not have to step back and play in their back four. Because, Jordan Henderson moving into the back four keeps things solid. Or even Milner might well have to play there this weekend, given the injuries that they've had. At least they've now got two central defenders to free those players to play up in other positions, because, it looked very threadbare against Spurs, particularly when the second half came around last weekend. We wondered if maybe the club might be a little bit stubborn, because, as Klopp said himself on Friday, it wasn't like there was frontline defenders who were available. So at that point, you have to have a bit of a ruffle around in the bargain bin to see what you can come up with. And they've gone, in the case of Kabak, he's a player with the future in mind. Liverpool are claiming that they had been scouting him already, and it was just a case of maybe their plans being slightly accelerated because of their need for defenders. And I think Ben Davies is genuinely coming in a lucky guy in terms of what happened with Liverpool, but perhaps a player at 25 years of age who'll come in and try and seize the opportunity. Let's see what happens. We remember when Stephen Corker came in during Klopp's first year in charge and his first window, and he was deployed up front as a last gasp striker as opposed to playing much in defence. So there's a possibility these two guys, when players are back from injury, won't get to play a huge amount of football. But Liverpool have had a freak season in terms of injuries so far. Not just their two frontline strikers out, or two frontline defenders out for the season, but to actually lose their backups as well. I think once Joel Matip was out and confirmed out for the season, it was a case of they had to do some business. I would probably put them down as the team who've done best on a transfer deadline weekend. Right. Maybe Arsenal might well have a claim to that crown as well, given that they've got 5 players who were big earners with no future at the club to leave at least 6 months before they were due to be moving out of the club. I think that'll be seen as a massive win for Arsenal further down the line, particularly if Martin Odegaard settles quickly.
So the overall transfer fees paid for players in the winter window was at its lowest since 2012. So it was only £68 million spent this time. So that was down on £188 million paid out last year. So well below half. And as you say, getting wages off your wage bill in this sort of window is a huge achievement. So I think you're right there. Arsenal probably had a really good window. You neglected to mention the key part of the merry-go-round, though. Josh King to Everton. And as somebody who takes part in Deal or No Deal every morning during the transfer window, it is very much goodbye, sweet prince, Josh King. Every single morning, we ask the question, will Ole Gunnar Solskjaer swoop for Josh King? Can he play on the right of a tree? Can he play on the left of the tree? Can he play in the middle at Old Trafford? Goodbye to that. Hello, Everton. You've got Josh King, and you've put to bed one of the longest-running transfer stories, because he was linked with every club, it seemed.
He was, yeah. No, he was one of those players that it seemed could come in. Obviously has Premier League experience. Not that he scored a massive amount of goals when he was in the Premier League with Bournemouth, but he's still seen as a player who could do a job for somebody. And Everton, again, needed cover in the striker positions because they've been pretty dependent. Richarlison started the season well, but hasn't been chipping in with that many goals. And then Dominic Calvert-Lewin, his red-hot form from the first half of the season has dried up a little bit in recent weeks. He looks tired and could probably do with being rotated in and out of the team a little bit. I thought it was a very fatigued-looking performance from Everton at the weekend against Newcastle. So again, getting a player in, getting them in cheaply, looks like it's going to be reasonable business for Everton there. And also, as I kind of neglected to mention too, Troy Parrott eventually got his move. It wasn't a deadline night deal, but he has had a pretty torrid time with Millwall in the first half of the season, and they'll be hoping that his next move this time around to Ipswich will give him a chance to play a little bit more time, particularly up front, because even he played in a more withdrawn role with Millwall when he did play, that maybe he can get a little bit more football now in the second half of this season and score some goals, because that is the one thing. You look at the one that's probably got away at the weekend in Patrick Bamford. There's very few Irish players who are scoring goals currently, and other than Conor Howren, who's got a couple for Swansea so far, the Irish frontline players aren't scoring. So if Troy Parrott can get some goals second half of the season, he probably plays himself massively into contention. Even we saw Aaron Connolly miss a very good chance for Brighton at the weekend. So I'm sure Stephen Kenny is just hoping that some form can be had when he's probably looking at a central defensive issue now with Shane Duffy's form at Celtic.
And Bamford is very much the one that got away, talking about his England prospects over the course of the last couple of days as well, which is just a dagger through the heart. The timing of all this yesterday, Will, was interesting. I didn't realise that they announced the Matip injury after they had done their business, which I guess shows another bit of negotiating tactics coming to the fore from Edwards.
Yeah, I think it was 24 minutes it was clocked at between the two signings being announced, and then unfortunately Joel Matip is out for the rest of the season with ankle ligament. Schalke and Preston, you didn't need to know about this. But Matip again he's a talented defender. And I think the joke kind of went that he finished his international career with Cameroon to be able to be injured for Liverpool is basically what's happened. And he comes back into the team sometimes. And I think Matip, when he is fit, as well as Joe Gomez, dovetails nicely with Virgil van Dijk, but Matip just can't stay fit for any considerable period of time. And then obviously went over on his ankle during that Tottenham game last Thursday, out for the rest of the year. You feel for him, and you would, if you're a Liverpool fan, you're really hoping that Van Dijk can step up his recovery over the next few weeks. I think there's still hope that if Liverpool go deep into Europe, Van Dijk could still be back around the quarterfinals or maybe semi-finals. And I'm sure they're hoping that it's not going to be a case of having to pair, say, Ben Davies with Fabinho for a potential Champions League quarterfinal. But we shall see what happens.
Okay, so Liverpool, the winners of transfer deadline day. Phil Egan, a very good morning to you. Do you go along with that? Liverpool kings of the transfer?
I don't think they're the kings of the transfer. I don't think I was actually just trying to think who won the transfer window, because obviously I remember Tottenham won it a few years ago and obviously didn't win anything after that. But yeah, they obviously had to sign the defenders. Joel Matip is a loss, but at the same time I think Liverpool fans have just got used to the fact that Joel Matip can't stay fit, and when he's around he's a bonus. But I actually think when he's around he's your first choice over Gomez. It's Van Dijk and Matip. I think back to the end of the 2018-19 season when they won the Champions League, Matip was in the team and he was obviously set up the Divock Origi goal in the Champions League final against Spurs. But I think back to the game against Bayern Munich, the tie with Bayern Munich, he was brilliant in those games. So it's a loss, but it's not really a surprise. And in fairness to him, when he comes in, when you factor in that he's basically out injured, comes back in, plays unbelievable, goes back out of the team with an under injury, comes back in and plays brilliant again. It's that's a special talent you have there, that he can just show no sign of ring rust and just put in these performances. And Will mentioned Virgil van Dijk. The worry there is that, you know, when Virgil van Dijk, if he does come back even in April, it's not going to be the same Virgil van Dijk. As strong as his recovery may have been, or all the work that he's put in, you can't just walk back into the team and you're the same Virgil van Dijk. It would take a few weeks to get back up to speed. It could take a couple of months. So you wonder, obviously, if things go well, I would be looking at Kabak probably more than Davis as getting more game time. If things go well, maybe they won't have to bring in Van Dijk, or they won't have to rush him back into the team.
So do you think, Phil, that they need to go again in the summer then to actually sign an upgrade on Joe Gomez if we accept that Matip isn't going to be able to play every game alongside Van Dijk?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's what probably will happen. I know Upamecano is a player that has been linked with them, and Bayern Munich pretty much said it yesterday. They said, yeah, we're looking at him, but Chelsea and Liverpool are in for them as well. So, I mean, I think it was always common knowledge that Liverpool were interested in him. They'll obviously get a close look at him when they play Leipzig in the Champions League as well. But they definitely need, like, Gomez is also injury prone, obviously not as injury prone as Joe Matip, but he's had a couple of serious injuries already. So yeah, I think they definitely need to sign another centre half, because you can't obviously this season has shown you can't factor in injuries, but you have to allow for injuries happening. And at the start of the season, Liverpool would have looked at Virgil van Dijk and thought, he never gets injured, so we just need one fit defender all the time beside Virgil van Dijk. But that all went up in smoke in that Merseyside derby.
What's going on this morning, Phil?
Well, we'll just go through some of the deals. Obviously, you mentioned Irish strikers. Obviously, Shane Long has made his move from Southampton to Bournemouth. It's a loan deal. It's until the end of the season. And this story kind of emerged yesterday, and it looked like it was going to be part of a Josh King move, where Josh King will go to Southampton and Shane Long will be used as part of that deal. But Josh King has obviously gone to Everton, and there is a £5 million fee. You mentioned the fact that he could have signed for Manchester United last year. That would have been for £20 million. So Bournemouth have taken a real hit on that in the last year. Southampton have brought in Takumi Minamino on loan from Liverpool. Now, Southampton wanted the option to buy Minamino at the end of this loan deal, but Liverpool said no to that. They obviously have brought in two defenders, Liverpool, Ben Davis from Preston for £2 million, and Schalke defender Ozan Kabak, who was joined on an initial loan deal. There's the option to buy, but they're not obligated to make that a permanent deal at the end of the season. But certainly looks like Michael Edwards has done some good things for Liverpool again in the transfer window, because there's not much outlay in terms of costs there. West Brom have brought in Ainsley Maitland-Niles from Arsenal. This is a player that was wanted by a few clubs, but he's decided to join the Baggies. Arsenal's Joe Willock has also gone out on loan. He's gone to Newcastle. And Celtic have brought in Everton defender John Joe Kenny on loan for the rest of the season. There's actually Premier League action tonight. Manchester United have a chance to move level on points at Manchester City. They host Southampton at Old Trafford tonight, and obviously looking to bounce back from last week's defeat to Sheffield United and the draw as well against Arsenal at the weekend. That game at Old Trafford kicks off at 8:15. At the same time, you've got Newcastle and Crystal Palace. Then at 6 o'clock, you've got Arsenal away to Wolves, and a big game then at the bottom, Sheffield United and West Brom at Bramall Lane. Looking at the table, it's very hard to see any of the bottom three getting out of trouble, considering Brighton beating Spurs the other day. But look, we know Big Sam has never been relegated. It's something he is very quick to remind us of, and he's going to have to work a bit of a miracle there. The GAA has said it would be irresponsible for counties to return to collective training at this time, but the association hasn't ruled out the National Leagues starting back in March. The organisation's COVID-19 advisory group will reconvene in 2 weeks' time. Ireland's engaged in talks with the English, Welsh and Scottish unions about a joint bid for the 2031 Rugby World Cup. Obviously, I mentioned there's football on tonight. There was no football on last night, so I'm sure a lot of people were glued to BBC One at 9 o'clock last night, and BBC Panorama. And one thing that came out of it is that Daniel Kinahan is still involved in boxing, according to this investigation. The 43-year-old claimed he had stepped back from the sport. Obviously, this came to the fore when his name was mentioned in the brokering of the Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua mega fight, which could happen later on this year. But Kinahan, obviously described in the High Court as the leader of the Kinahan organised crime group, was the main target of the Regency Hotel attack during that boxing weigh-in 5 years ago. There was footage of that in the documentary last night. The documentary also says that Kinahan remains involved in boxing. He advises some of MTK's boxers as well as fighters worldwide. We obviously know that Kinahan has no criminal convictions and has always strongly denied being involved in organised crime. But there was a lot of things in that people were well aware of, but there was probably people that didn't know anything about this. So I think it was a very interesting watch, and I'm sure both of you got to see it last night, lads.
Yeah, and we'll be chatting to Nicola Tallant of the Sunday World after 8 o'clock this morning to get her take on it. She was obviously in the documentary as well. Phil Egan, great stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks,
it is 7:48 on this Tuesday morning. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. As you can see there, the running order is Donnchadh Boyle, who is standing by. We'll get to him in just a moment. The papers then after 8 o'clock, some of the back page stories rounding up transfer deadline day. Nicola Tallant then is up at 8:10, and John Duggan will be joining us at 8:30 to talk Patrick Reed, to talk Rory McIlroy and a little bit of Spurs. Our World Cup of Pundits then continues at 8:45. We'll bring you the first round results and give you the last 16 ties. Kenny Cunningham has beaten Rio Ferdinand. That is the top line this morning in the World Cup of Pundits. Spanish football then with Graham Hunter at 9:05, the Lionel Messi situation, the brilliant Atletico Madrid team. That's all on the agenda with him. And then Rog and Phillips, our build-up to Wales versus Ireland begins at 9:30 this morning here on OTB AM. But I can say now that Donnchadh Boyle of the Irish Independent is with us. Good morning to you, Donnchadh. How are things?
Hello, Owen. Hello, Will. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Let's start with the breaking news this morning that Ronan McCarthy and Paddy Talley are both set to be hit with 12-week bans. This is for collective training sessions. People will have seen the video of the Cork players on the beach a couple of weeks back. So this is going to be confirmed today, and they're also going to lose home venue for at least one of their league games, it seems. They're clamping down hard on this, the GAA, Donnchadh.
Yeah, they are, and I think they had to be seen to clamp down on it hard as well. I suppose throughout this whole thing, the GAA have been very conscious of, along with their public health responsibility, been very conscious of their image, because I suppose they know there's everyone's watching the big organisations like the FAI, the RFU, to see how they react. And this was one of those scenarios where I suppose, the instructions were very clear, and when it became as public as it did, and in the PSNI were involved in the one in Uri, as you mentioned, the footage from the Cork training session, so they had to come down hard. what will be interesting now is to see how the counties react, whether they will just take their licks on this one and let it go away quietly, or whether maybe they might be tempted to challenge it.
The situation then with regards to when the leagues get underway is something that's been up in the air, because before Christmas the GAA said that they plan to have inter-county teams back in training by this point, by mid-January, and then to have starting the leagues in late February. Obviously the situation has deteriorated. Maybe the GAA probably couldn't have seen this coming too much, but this looks like a little bit of an endless situation, and at the very best the entire calendar is just being copied and pasted 1 month later than it was originally penned for. Is that the situation really as it stands at the moment, Donnchadh?
Yeah, well, yesterday was actually sort of a quietly important day for the GAA in 2021 in terms of that COVID advisory committee meeting yesterday at 5 o'clock. Actually, at one stage yesterday, there was sort of a rumour doing the rounds the meeting had been cancelled, and that was setting people off. I wonder why it had been cancelled. Was there a major announcement coming? But as it turned out, it went ahead yesterday at 5 virtually, obviously, and late last night, the news emerged that they had kicked the can down the road, essentially. I think they've been doing that for a little while, you're right, and they've moved everything back. But I think this is the last time they can do it with the calendar in its current form. I think if they do manage to, Tom Ryan was quite, he was sounded a positive note in his briefing to counties afterwards, saying that there was a chance that, you know, the end of March deadline could go ahead, that the league could start at that stage. And they sort of haven't given up hope on that completely. But if we were to miss that deadline, in 2 weeks' time when they make a final decision, if you miss that, I think now you're looking at at that stage you'd be looking at major surgery in terms of your competition structures and what you want to do. You know, as it stands, there's a backdoor in hurling and football, and with the month being lost already, you are probably looking at putting the very latter stages of the club competitions into 2022. I think you were certainly leaning that way. So maybe the All-Ireland semi-finals and finals in the club, or the provincial series with the very latter stages of it. So if in 2 weeks' time they can't give the green light to county teams to go back training, and they can't, they're not in a position to grant them that, I think then you will see the calendar change fairly dramatically from what it is. I think they're moving slow at the minute, and you know, the GAA is often criticised for that. But I think in this scenario, it's the right thing to do. 2 more weeks, we'll see exactly where we are. Like I was looking at the case numbers there when Tommy got on to me last night to come on this morning. I just looked at the case numbers. If you go back to when when collective contact training was allowed for clubs back at the end of June last year, that day there were 24 cases in the country. And then when county teams returned to collective training on September of last year, it was 208. Yesterday we had nearly 1,100, and with a much more, you know, not to get into the science of it or talk about something you're not qualified to talk on, but it's obviously a much more transmissible variant that's out there at the minute. So they're in a very difficult position. They're reluctant to change what they had set out to do, so they're going to give it every chance. But I suppose they have to step carefully here.
Donnchadh, I wonder as well, when it comes to the timeline of this, I'm sure they're going to be watching what's happening with the League of Ireland. The fixtures came out yesterday for that. Kind of end of March is the start time for those leagues. You look at what Tom Ryan said last night too. They seem completely committed to a 4-week block for training before they come back, though. He said, again, reinforcing the idea that teams will get a 4-week run-in at the very least. Yeah,
and you have to give them at least that, because I think the nature of the season, again, is going to be so hot and heavy that 4 weeks is probably the minimum that you could afford them. I know the GPA are very strong on that. I think that early on in the pandemic, for the original discussions, they were looking at a 6-week run-in at one stage. So 4 weeks is probably as tight as they can make it. But as I said earlier, you're getting to the stage now where you are starting to count the weekends in one hand. Like the GAA are determined to give as many club games, or as many weekends as possible to club games. And the tricky thing about the club calendar is as well, in a handful of counties, there's more than 1 or 2 finals to be played. And it's not just senior finals, but it's the lower down the grade ones, which, you know, aren't going to grab any headlines, but are very important for the grading of the 2021 championship. So if you have a junior and intermediate final to play, obviously you need to before any draws can be made, you have to know what grade you're going to be playing, and so that those finals need to be run off as well. So there's a lot to be done, and as I said, the window's starting to close a little bit in that. So in 2 weeks' time, it's going to be very important, and it's going to be a very big decision in terms of how the GAA year will look. I'm
sure they're hoping as well, though, that this structure that they come up with the regionalised leagues, where there are fewer games to be played. Okay, the bad weekends that were factored in for weather and so on might well be lost, but there is the potential, particularly with the football here, Donnchadh, that they might be able to run the football leagues off pretty quickly, and the hurling league is that bit smaller too, that there is a possibility that maybe they might be able to run things as planned. But as you say, probably early April is as late as they can go before they start looking at qualifiers and maybe having to just change the championship around a bit.
I think that's it. And as I say, there is a little bit of wriggle room at the far end of the club championship, because if you were going to push, say, the All-Ireland series into the following January, you could look at that, and that would only really affect maybe a handful of clubs. So that we're going into the new calendar year. But there's just very little wriggle room after this period that we're looking at now. There's not much more left in the calendar without performance surgery on what the plans were. And I suppose the plans, I suppose most people expected things to be a little bit better this year. Whether that was misguided or not, it's turned out to be quite the opposite. We're after 5 weeks of hard lockdown. As I said, we're still at almost 1,100 cases yesterday. So it's on a knife edge at the minute in its current guise. I've no doubt there will be something, might be pushed later in the year. Worst case scenario, it'll be pushed. It could be a bit like last year, a bit of a helter skelter, week on week knockout maybe. But as it stands, they're trying their best to preserve what's there.
I wonder what's going to happen with the under-20 championships as well, Donnchadh, given those players have lost out a bit with Sigerson and Fitzgibbon being lost, and they're often championships that kind of get lost in the shuffle anyway when inter-county senior teams come back. I wonder if we're looking at under-20 being pushed back to later in the year, if there is a push to try and get everything played off pretty quickly when they do get back to play.
Yeah, I do think there's an appetite to do that as much as possible. Even when last year, when everything was up in the air, I remember making queries about those sort of competitions, and they always wanted to play them. What there might be for everyone then is a little bit of pain in so far as it won't be ideal. You won't maybe get the prep time you wanted. You won't get maybe the competition format you wanted. Maybe you might have to compromise on a number of things. But in terms of there being that competition in whatever guise it might be, I think they're very, very keen to maintain as many of them as possible, because they've always managed to run off championships, and that's the sort of something that they want to continue doing, obviously. And I think they will move the deck chairs as much as possible to continue to make sure that happens, because it's sort of where games, when you start dropping competitions, then it's not what the organisation, I suppose, would profess to be about. It's like we get games on for people. And I think last year as well, to their credit, they ran a very good and very safe championship. Sligo obviously missed out and awfully missed the first round of their championship in hurling. But by and large, they managed to run off the game. So that will give people confidence when they start moving in the next couple of weeks and months.
So what should we be keeping an eye on here for Donnchadh? What is the date where there is going to be no return, where some sort of change to the structure has to be made? It sounds like it's the end of this month, that if beyond the end of this month and inter-county teams haven't started training by the 1st of March, there's really no hope of the Alliance League starting at the end of March. Yeah, and I think that's probably fair enough. If you're looking at another brief in a 2 weeks' time, that'll bring us into the middle of February. At that stage, county managers will need to know, and players will need to know as well, what way their season looks like. And if they still can't give them an answer, then at that stage, I think you could be looking at, right, go back to the drawing board here a little bit. So it's a fairly straightforward championship this year. Football, it's basically one chance, one backdoor chance. Hurling has a backdoor as well. So obviously there's weekends there. No one wants to go down the route of you want to give teams as many chances as possible. There's a Tailteann Cup on the cards. So there is a lot of, they are trying to keep an awful lot of balls in the air at the minute on. And if it does miss that mid-February, late February sort of deadline they're talking about now, I think we're looking at a very different GAA season than the one that was envisaged maybe only 4 or 5 weeks ago. The thing is, a very different GAA season has been on the agenda for the last few weeks. There was a Zoom call last week with inter-county managers where they were told about two options to reform the All-Ireland Football Championship. For people who might have missed this story, Donnchadh, what were the two options? And could there be a sort of nuclear button pressed this year where these are more condensed championships, and as a result, 2021 might almost be the best time to get these things underway?
I suppose the idea of the conversation the managers had about the championship is just to gauge their opinion on it.
Right.
This is one that's been bouncing around for a long time, as you know, and it's kind of been speeded up very, very rapidly and in a very un-GAA way to all of a sudden we're moving rapidly towards this split season idea, and which it's very progressive, and I think there's an awful lot of merit in it, but I suppose there is unease within parts of the GAA that we're making a major decision so quickly. Now you can say they were forced into it, and maybe that's a good thing, that now they're looking at very radical ideas. One of them is like link the All-Ireland League, link the league to the All-Ireland Championship, and you know, a couple of like Colin Collins has come out very very strongly in favour of that. Whether they're moving quicker than they need to, you know, there is that fear exists. I suppose it's one of those things that it was due for discuss at Congress. I think it's been pushed back a little bit because there's so much else going on. Congress obviously at the end of this month, but it's a very big decision for the GAA to be making at a time when it's making loads of big decisions. But I do think the momentum behind the split season, I think that's more or less like it seems to be over the line. But the formation of the All-Ireland Championships, the provinces, what their future has, which has always been a bit of a stickler. There's some big calls being made in that over the next couple of congresses, and it will be interesting to see where it goes, because like the GAA loves tradition. It loves what it knows. It loves, you know, it requires a 60% majority to make any decision. So it is innately a conservative organisation. So whether it's ready to make big radical calls, or whether people will balk, because Congress is a very funny thing. Like, you know, it's you go into things and things are very much expected to do go one way and they go completely the other. So if and when this comes to a vote, it's going to be very it's a huge decision the GAA will be making of what its next 5 and 10 years will look like. Because the other thing to throw in the mix there was that the Super 8 was a 3-year experiment, and it only got 2 years of that so far. So there would be sort of, you could make the argument that the Super 8s is due at least one more season in terms of to see how it played out, because the GAA made a commitment for 3 years. So that has to be thrown into the mix as well. And obviously other things that come into it, like finance. You know, running a big championship is more expensive than running a small knockout one, and doesn't look like you're going to have crowds in this year. So where does that leave it? Does the government step in? You know, can the GAA afford to keep this ticking over year on year with essentially no income in terms of ticket sales?
The GAA are obviously going to be compressed into such a tight window here, especially if we go beyond this month. And I see David Power, for example, this morning saying that he is in favour of one of these new proposed motions about changing the Senior All-Ireland Football Championship, saying that this conference-based idea, that format where you've got 4 divisions of 8 teams and going for the All-Ireland series in that way, is something that he would be in favour of. That is your amalgamation of your league and your championship. That, like, I wonder, Donnchadh, could they be in a place this year where they think this could be the perfect opportunity to try something like this year? We won't have the time to possibly play the full league. The championship may have to go back to a backdoor-less format. Could we possibly have a situation where they just try out one of these things for a one-off year, where they just give this thing a lash this summer, especially if they want to get the club season played off?
It would open the door to them, but again, I suppose what they'll be looking at, my suspicion would be that they'll be looking at just a condensed version of what's on the cards already. So I think it's much more likely that they maybe revert to a backdoor in the football championship, or remove the backdoor in the football championship and skim a few weekends off there, because that's really what you're talking about in that scenario. It's not really that there wouldn't be a whole lot of breathing space for anything, or even time to turn around and say, right, this is what we're going to do, and give counties a chance to familiarise with themselves with it. I think it's going to be a very tight turnaround to change what was the projected plan to the new plan. It will literally have a matter of weeks to do it, I would say, you know, in terms of getting the final out there. They still have to do the draws, which was pulled yesterday for obvious reasons, because they didn't know what way the season was going to look, so they can't do it. So I just think that I think that there's not a whole pile of time or space or maybe even appetite to do something radical straight away. I think that they're just going to take the wins they can get, and if they can get something up and running this year, they'll take it. And it might be a fairly traditional thing insofar as a couple of few league matches, and then straight into a championship of some form. But as so far as doing one of those proposals that they're talking about, I just don't think there's the time. I don't think there's a room. Yeah. And you know what? I don't think it would be fair on the new structure either, because you'd just be shoehorning it in there, and people would, you know, it would need a proper look at it rather than just being sort of an afterthought and put in because there's a bit of a room there. I don't think that's the way they'd like to introduce something, because, as I said earlier, it would be a fairly radical step.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. Just one other thing, Donnchadh, we wanted to touch on before we let you go is the black card in hurling, or the sin bin in hurling, without using the black card phrase. So there's going to be no Congress this year, basically. They feel that they can't debate things properly if it has to be via Zoom. But the sin bin in hurling is of such importance that there is going to be a conversation around this month, basically, where the strength of arguments made by leading hurling counties around this proposal that a sin bin for cynical play that prevents a goal scoring opportunity, it will be the rule. This is going to be heard this month, Donnchadh, and I guess the idea of a sin bin coming into hurling, or some sort of punishment for cynicism within the sport, looks like it's coming ever closer, and it looks like it is a matter of urgency from the GAA standpoint.
Yeah, and there seems to be a greater acceptance now that there is something that there is an issue to deal with. I think if you only have to go back maybe 2 years, and if the black card or any sort of a cynical play, a sanction for it was mentioned, I think people balked at it. Hurling people balked at it genuinely. They just thought the game was fine, leave it alone. And there's been a significant shift, I think, in attitudes the last while. And you've had some very influential people. I think Ned Quinn has made reference to it this morning. I know Liam Griffin did in the Independent on Saturday. You know, I think there was just a body of work there, like, that you just couldn't really ignore anymore. The thing about it is, no more than in football, when it comes to the crunch, there will still be a scenario with the way it is in football at the minute. There is still a scenario where it pays to drag a fella down going through on goal. So the unintended consequence of any sort of sanction coming in have to be examined very carefully. Because if you're at the minute, it's 10 minutes, but late in the game, in a football match, it's no meaningful sanction. 10 minutes out is no meaningful sanction if it's the last minute or two of the match, really. It certainly doesn't make up for denying a goal scoring opportunity maybe when the game is on the line. So that's the players will always try and find a way to manipulate the rules in such a way that it still suits them. That's just sport. That's competitive sport. And I think you'll be looking at something like that again, where depending on what they bring in, it just needs to be very carefully thought out that it is brought in and punishes the right thing at all areas of all times in the game, rather than just the idea where 10 minutes off is the right sanction for a foul like that. So it's going to have to be thought through very carefully. And again, it will, while the move is in favour of it, to get something over the line, it won't be straightforward, because you know there is that innate conservatism is there. It is, and it's strong, I think, too, for a lot of people.
All right, Donnchadh Boyle of the Irish Independent, thanks a million for taking the call this morning.
Thanks, lads.
Donnchadh Boyle there on the line. It is 9 minutes past 8 on this Tuesday morning. Still plenty to come for you on OTB AM. We're going to be talking football with Graham Hunter after 9 o'clock. There's Patrick Reid with John Duggan before 9 o'clock. And up next, Nicola Tallant joins us to chat about the BBC Panorama investigation into Daniel Kinahan and his involvement with boxing. Back in a few.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. Off the ball.
Ronnie Whelan could play, by the way. And let me tell you, talk about people being dirty when you could tackle. He was filthy.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Yeah.
Dear me.
Off the Ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1.
This is OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, study the form with our Racing Post Spotlight before watching the action with free live streaming on all UK and Irish horse races. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
Calling all builders, joiners, plasterers and dryliners. Need advice on the right materials for the job? Consider it done. You need them on site and in your hand. Consider it done. You want access to over 10,000 products from the leading construction brands without having to start up the van. Consider it done. There's another way of doing things. E-Tag. We talk with you to solve your problem and deliver what you need directly onto site. No second guessing, no seconds wasted. Click etag.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Golf in the world yesterday wasn't cheering for Patrick Reed to lose, and that's just a fact, apart from Patrick Reed's family. I hope this isn't an offensive analogy, but to me it feels like the PGA Tour is trapped in an abusive relationship with this guy. This guy, quotes unquotes, abuses the PGA Tour, and there's nothing they can do about him because abuses the PGA Tour in the sense that he kind of rides roughshod over the rules, but there's nothing they can do because their ultimate goal is to maintain this image of a pristine, gentlemanly sport that's all about integrity. And by the way, why don't you ally your multinational corporation with this clean and pristine sport? So and Reed knows this, so he kind of pushes the boundaries. And the PGA Tour has obviously decided we're going to put up with this, probably for the reason you've highlighted there. You know, we need a villain. He's a perfect figure for that. But you know, at what cost to the game? I mean, if this guy gets away with it on a regular basis, which he does actually, then you know, who's coming in behind him? You know, what are other people? You know, I've got a 15-year-old kid who plays golf. I'm mad keen on golf. I'm sure everybody else does. A lot of people do. They see this guy behaving like this, you know, and he gets away with it. Well, who knows? I mean, I've been around junior golf quite a lot, and there's enough cheating going on without role models like Patrick Reed.
Yeah, Lawrence Duggan there on last night's Off the Ball, chatting to Richie about Patrick Reed's latest controversy on the PGA Tour. Right, at 12 minutes past 8 on this Tuesday morning, we're turning our attention to the Panorama documentary that aired on BBC last night. It was digging into MTK, their relationship with Daniel Kinahan, and his relationship with boxing in general. Delighted to say that one of the voices you would have seen speaking on the documentary, Nicola Tallant of the Sunday World, is with us this morning. Good morning, Nicola.
Good morning.
So before we get stuck into some of the details from the documentary, just first of all, how important is it that this documentary was aired on BBC One at prime time? And if we talk about British media coverage of the Daniel Kinahan story, this is probably right at the top of the list now. This will have got a lot of eyeballs on it last night.
Yeah, there's no doubt, but Panorama packs a punch that nobody else can, I think, you know, in the UK. And it is a big, powerful documentary that is months in the making, is heavily financed, and has been able to go right into the heart of this issue, which is, where is Daniel Kinahan when it comes to boxing, and the most important and expensive fight that is, the last I heard of it, is due to happen in June, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. So it really is important. I see a lot of the media this morning, the Telegraph, the Guardian, hitters have all kind of come out and reported on it. So Daniel Kinahan's back on the front and back pages of the newspapers there in the UK this morning.
Because I guess a couple of months ago there was a real effort to try and remove Daniel Kinahan from the headlines. Obviously the reports that he had stepped away from the organisation of this fight, he would no longer be advising fighters. That will have done the opposite effect. That will have had the opposite effect on Kinahan's efforts, this going out last night.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, that seemed like a bit of a placation anyway. He had stepped back into the shadows. Tyson Fury and Bob Arum both said that he was no longer going to be involved in the negotiations. But literally the tweet after I think that announcement was made. Tyson Fury put up a kind of a face-saving thing for Daniel Kinahan, saying that he was going to be the next president of Ireland or something, I can't remember, and an Irish flag, something a bit like that. But it was all very jokey and friendly and all the rest of it. And I think nobody has been under any illusion, but Daniel Kinahan is there, he's in the background of it. He founded that original MTK thing, and, it moved its headquarters out to Dubai after he relocated there. And, he's obviously very, very close to that whole Tyson Fury career.
And the big line that we get from the last few minutes of the documentary last night is this question: is Daniel Kinahan still involved in boxing? And Bobby Egan says yes, Nicola. And I think this is the big development from last night.
Yeah, it is. And I also think that, it's been put out there on the table now by Barry McGuigan. Where has this money come from for the expansion of MTK? He has described the kind of millions it would have cost to get to where they have got. He talks about signing 9 boxers in 1 week. And when Barry McIntyre put it to Bobby Egan, where is the money coming from, he just simply said, MTK have a pot of money. He didn't, he denied that it was coming obviously from the Kinahan's other business. But nonetheless, that question has now been asked of them. I don't think we're probably going to get any answers, but nonetheless, it's been a worthwhile process for that reason alone.
Nicola, when it comes to Daniel Kinahan, we had Sandra Vaughan putting out a release last year before she allegedly stepped away from MTK, saying that he had moved back into an advisory role and then eventually he was going to step away from boxing entirely. He got somewhat involved in potentially bringing mixed martial arts to Bahrain, and then he left that role afterwards as well. I kind of get the impression of a guy who's going around the Middle East currently, staying involved in combat sport, despite all the claims that he's going to walk away from sport. There's no real impression that I'm getting that Daniel Kinahan is actually trying to step away from sport at all here.
No, and also, I don't think he left the role in Bahrain. I think they actually issued a statement themselves, the Bahrainian government, saying that they were cutting their ties with him. Kinahan and his cohorts and his supporters, and he has lots of supporters, as you know, in the boxing world, big, very influential characters in the boxing world. Each time he does take a step away, there's always the reason is because of negative media publicity. So it's the media fault. It's not anything or any admission to his connections to organised crime. It is simply that he's got a hard time from the media. That is always why he steps back. So, from that point of view, you can see why obviously he feels he belongs there as a power broker. And a lot of people very high up in boxing have hitched onto him, and it's going to take an awful lot for them to untangle themselves and the support they've given him.
And in the last 10 minutes of the documentary last night, the feeling seemed to be there that maybe things are tightening in around him slightly in terms of an investigation from the USA. The Spanish police have been chasing him for quite some time. There was certainly speculation within the documentary that the Irish authorities were potentially working with those in Dubai to try and get him back to Ireland. Surely this is a time when Daniel Kinahan should be trying to keep a fairly low profile.
Yes, but he doesn't always do what, you would, a rational person would consider he should do. And that's really what marks him out. He was obviously working away there in the background, getting that Tyson Fury match organised, but he just didn't seem to be able to help himself. He had to step out into the limelight and say, I did it. And it was quite an orchestrated thing when that happened. You can be under no illusion, but Tyson Fury didn't talk out of school when he called him out, but nor did Bob Arum when he called him out publicly. That was Daniel's arrival into the limelight of the sport. He wanted to be credited for that. So that's kind of the nature of him. So he doesn't always do what would be the sensible thing. As regards the Garda investigation, my understanding of it, or what I would see it for what it's worth, is that investigation has moved into the final phase, the final takedown. What you've had is a policy where the guards here, because they can obviously only go after who's in this country, have taken down Kinahan Mafia associates from the bottom of the pile to the top. One of the most senior members, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, has pleaded guilty in the UK and is currently awaiting sentencing on serious charges. But the probe isn't over, and they're still after the big targets and those people who've directed this crime here in this country. So Daniel Kinahan himself in a statement suggested that he wouldn't get a fair trial, which gives us an indication that he is now considering that maybe he will be put on trial himself. So it's really only going in one direction, and we do know that a number of police forces are involved in the takedown of the Kinahan Mafia, and I think it's just a matter of time really before it comes to its conclusion.
And the suggestion seems to be at the moment, Nicola, that potentially Daniel Kinahan's assets in the US could be seized potentially here.
Yeah, in the US, whatever he has, there is a court case going on in the US where he has been named, and it's been alleged in the court proceedings that he's used basically drug money to fund this MTK. So that is a very significant case. I don't know how long it takes for these civil actions to go through the courts in the US, but perhaps you might see some criminal investigations possibly getting closer to him quicker than that could happen.
Is there a lot of reputational potential damage done to MTK, as you mentioned, and as you've probably seen over the weekend, with even some of MTK's followers on Twitter contacting you directly, and other journalists, and many were claiming that they don't really care what the BBC reported last night. Is there a concern for them that this could do them damage, considering the amount of boxers that they've acquired over the last 4 years, that they're on the BBC and being linked with organised crime last night?
I don't think they seem to particularly care, to be honest with you. Look, if people pulled their support for them, if the television stations that that run their fights and support them, if the American boxing fraternity pulled out, if people stopped buying their merchandise, stopped tuning in to watch the fights and pay per view, that would cause them damage. But until anything like that happens, they are feeling untouchable. And I'm not sure that, look, obviously that is going to have had some damage, but unless there's some political pressure put on now, and in particular put onto the television stations that work with them, I don't see what will change.
Because my feeling on this would be that the regimes in the Middle East are more than happy for similar purposes to Daniel Kinahan in terms of their own profile getting these fights into the Middle East. They're going to continue to do business with MTK. And we had Bob Arum on Off the Ball before Christmas, and he said, look, he's dealt with all sorts of people. We asked him about him being a public prosecutor before and whether he'd have any concern about potentially talking to someone who's involved in crime. And he said he just deals with a guy to get a deal done for Tyson Fury. The feeling that I get is that these countries that are going to host these fights, the TV companies that you mentioned, will probably continue to work away with MTK because they only care about their own interests in the boxing game.
Well, that certainly seems to be the case. Look, it's all about the money, isn't it? And that's it. There's so many people invested in it now. I mean, inside the UK, there are, and I'm not a sports person here, you know what I mean? I'm just talking from my sort of knowledge is on the crime end of it. But surely inside the UK, there are television giants like Sky who are working with MTK, and that's really where I think the corporate political pressure can go on. Outside, we don't have any control what happens in the United Arab Emirates. They are a country and a law unto themselves. The Emirates have, have offered Daniel Kinahan a home for the last 3 years, while the Gardaí here would say that the Kinahan organised crime group have directed murder on the streets of Dublin. So, what do you do? They just seem to be, and not only Daniel Kinahan, by the way, the Emirates are harbouring and have been harbouring quite a lot of criminals from all over the world who've been accused in their own countries of directing criminal organisations. So it seems that in the Emirates, any money is good money. So that's what you're fighting against outside. But we can certainly police, and even from a political point of view, we can police what happens in our own countries. And I think that Panorama documentary surely will put a little bit of political pressure now on people who are dealing with this company, who are just so closely linked to Kinahan.
Can I just go back to something you said a moment ago, Nicola? So there is an investigation ongoing in the United States at the moment looking into where MTK's money has come from, as opposed to Daniel Kinahan and what he has done, or the links that he has. There is an investigation ongoing into MTK specifically and their finances.
This is the civil court proceedings you're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be an investigation. That would be a civil suit that's been taken by a boxing promoter over in the US. On the criminal side of things, certainly the DEA, Homeland Security and Border Controls in the US have been working closely with the Garda Síochána here and with the NCA in the UK and with the Guardia Civil in Spain. Australian police forces have been working together with them, and the Netherlands and various other European police forces. The civil action is a civil case that's been taken by a promoter there who says that basically Daniel Kinahan nicked his boxer. And the reason, basically, this is in layman's terms, I'm describing what has been laid out in the court papers in layman's terms. The reason he was able to nick his boxer and give him all this money was because he was funding this organisation, this MTK, with the profits of his criminal business. So that's what has been claimed. Clearly, Daniel Kinahan has a right to defend that, and himself as to MTK, and no doubt they will go in there and defend those allegations. But nonetheless, it's just another element of, you can see where they've been causing, they've been everywhere they go, they seem to cause sort of consternation in the boxing world. You heard Barry McGuigan last night discuss how he had lost boxers that he'd put his life and soul into training, and because of the money they're offering, they're undercutting everybody in the boxing world, and they have been taking it over. Look, if that's by legitimate funds, very well, but I think McGuigan was suggesting that the kind of millions that you'd be talking to see that growth are quite staggering.
And the way that changes, you assume, is that there are more people like Barry McGuigan who come out and make noise about this, because he's probably not the only person involved in boxing who has been affected by this, who has felt that their hard work into fighters has probably not gone all the way. They haven't been able to see their own fruits produced in terms of professional boxing, that MTK have actually been the ones rewarded. Do you think that there is going to be more than Barry McGuigan coming out over the next little while to actually say, listen, there's been big offers made for my fighters and I just can't compete with this?
People just seem to be terrified within the boxing world, the good people, the ones who are doing honest business. And, this MTK with the shadow of Kinahan in the background seems to have become a complete giant, and they seem to have been eating up everything in their sights in boxing. And you've got people like McGuigan who've been left looking like small fry. And it's a bit of a David versus Goliath fight with that. But from a criminal point of view, it took a long time for voices to come out against the Kinahan mafia as well. But people, I think, just need to look. Fear is debilitating. It is debilitating. And when people are afraid, and it's a genuine fear that they have, they just won't speak up and speak out because they're afraid of what will happen. They're afraid for their livelihoods. They're afraid for their families. And to them, and, they have reason for that fear to be very real for them.
there's obviously been a Kinahan response to this, kind of disassociating themselves from all the details and all the allegations from last night's documentary. But there's also been an MTK response. And I guess what they've said is that it's true that Mr. Kinahan does provide personal advice to a number of boxers managed by MTK Global, while also maintaining that he's never owned or controlled the client company that they're involved with. So I think this is probably the distance that they've found, the happy distance that they've found with Daniel Kinahan, that they're okay with his name being associated with the company, but he has no meaningful role within the company. He isn't a businessman working for the company. He is merely an advisor. I guess trying to increase that distance is the next challenge for the boxing community over the next little while.
It's not that long ago that MTK and the CEO, Sandra Vaughan, was sending out legal letters to the entire Irish press, telling them that Daniel Kinahan had absolutely nothing to do with MTK, had severed all ties, and that anybody who suggested otherwise would be, whipped down in the courts. So their stance has completely changed on him. I mean, Sandra Vaughan and Danny Vaughan, her husband, who's a coach in MTK, went to the High Court in London, and they signed sworn affidavits to the Old Bailey when they were looking for to take defamation proceedings against an anonymous Twitter account called The Whistleblower, who has been very critical of MTK and of Daniel Kinahan. And in those affidavits, certainly Sandra Vaughan's, who I saw, denied that she had anything, that Daniel Kinahan had absolutely anything to do with MTK, that he was completely and utterly separated from it since he had sold out to her. She had bought it entirely, and he was nowhere near the place. So it's a bit of a turnaround, to say the least, that he's there kind of in the ether. I think in her statement after the Tyson Fury selfie, which sent the whole thing viral, she discussed how Kinahan was a personal friend of hers, how she herself, although he's younger, goes to him for advice because he's got the Midas touch when it comes to business, and he's such a guru, really. So, and she spoke about in that public statement, which is available there publicly, that, he was a very, very close friend of hers, and she even was a close friend of his wife, and his children were a credit to him and all the rest of it. So it's all very cozy, and I can personally take MTK's statements with a grain of salt, because having been at the receiving end of the more blatant dismissal of any involvement of Daniel Kinahan with them, it just doesn't seem to be the sort of place where you can totally believe everything that comes out of their statements.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing we just wanted to touch on this morning, Nicola, is that it's 5 years this week since the Regency shooting. And I know you've done a great podcast with Detective Chief Superintendent Angela Willis. I was listening to it yesterday, and it really seems that over the last little while, the sense is that they've really got to grips with what happened 5 years ago. The arrests, the investigations have all been fruitful.
Very much so. And, there's 60 associates of the Kinahan Mafia behind bars for feud-related activity at the moment. Most of them are actually serving sentences. A lot of them pleaded guilty, such was the quality of the evidence against them. And others are before the Special Criminal Court, which has been vital in the fight against organised crime in this country, because there's no jury. It's just a 3-judge court. So no jury to intimidate, because that is the nature of that world. They have done an absolutely amazing job, and I do think that there's a lot of critics to An Garda Síochána, and there's a lot of things wrong with the organisation, and I certainly am no songstress for them, but I do think that this has been a moment in the force's history where it's probably been its most successful fight against organised crime, and I think they stand out as a force across the world for what they've done, because dismantling a mafia is no mean feat. It's not something that can be done overnight, especially like a global empire like the Kinahan one is. The various different territories, difficult ones like the United Arab Emirates and stuff, where they exist, where they run their business from. So it's been an amazing 5-year process. They've gone for people at the very, very bottom of the ladder and for those at the very, very top. So in the cases of these murder cells, and 30 people are behind bars who are all part of murder cells, they have gone for the spotters. So they are the lowest of the low. They'll get a few bob for keeping an eye out on the street to see when a car goes up or down. They've gone for them, and they've gone for the gunmen, the people who've pulled the triggers or who intended to. And that is a new policy, and it has been very successful. The use of our surveillance legislation has been vital in that. And we can only hope that going into the future, that this is the continued new modus that the guards will take when fighting organised crime.
I should mention that podcast is called Crime World. It's episode 12 with Angela Willis. You should check it out now. It's really, really good. Listen, Nicola Tallant, thanks a million for taking the call this morning. I appreciate your time.
Okay. Have a good day.
Cheers. Nicola Tallant there, investigations editor with the Sunday World. It is 8:35 on this Tuesday morning. We asked the question last night, how worried should Irish fans be about Matt Doherty's form? Martin Lipton was on the football show.
It's a bit of all of it, isn't it? I think he didn't play particularly well. He came back from the internationals at the start of the season looking a little bit leggy, I thought. He didn't look right. He didn't play well in those opening games. He was signed because they were desperate to get rid of Aurier. They didn't sell Aurier. Aurier then ended up being first choice until he throws his toys out the pram against Liverpool at half-time last week. But even then, he goes without him again at Brighton, playing with a back three, which you would have thought was arguably the setup most conducive to using Doherty, as that's what he'd been used to at Wolves. Well, I think you should better play right back in the four in any event. Something clearly is awry in the relationship. I'm not saying they've had a fallout. Just he doesn't appear to have the trust and faith in Doherty as a player that you'd expect, given that he was very much his prime signing, and for a while it looked as though he might be his only signing of the summer as well, until that late flurry with a few more coming in. I think it'll be a surprise and disappointment to Doherty, but also the Spurs, because they were looking at him to be an important, integral member of the starting lineup, and for whatever reason it hasn't happened, and he hasn't. Let's be honest, he hasn't impressed. There have been a series of weak performances. A needless red card the other week against Leeds when he didn't need to do anything. The game was dead. Why get yourself involved then? Things like that don't help.
Yeah, Martin Lipton on last night's football show chatting to Richie about Matt Doherty's recent struggles. Coming up over the next little while, we're going to be chatting to John Duggan in just a moment. He's got the sports news. We're going to be talking Patrick Reed with him. We'll do a bit of Spurs with him as well. We've got the World Cup of Pundits coming your way at 10 to 9. So you can go on to @OffTheBall AM on Twitter and vote for the last 16 clashes, which are getting underway today. A couple of upsets in the group stages yesterday, so we'll be bringing you the bracket for that. And then after 9, we'll be chatting to Graham Hunter. John Duggan, how are things?
Good, Owen and Will. How are we getting on?
All good, all good. Let's actually start with what we just heard there. Martin Lipton talking about the struggles of Matt Doherty. How worried are you, not even just from an Irish perspective, from a Spurs perspective, about how his form has gone recently?
I don't know, worried is the word I would be using, but I just think he's just finding it difficult in a different system. He's a guy who played as a wing-back for Wolves, was excellent in that role under Nuno Espirito Santo, was sold for 15 million in the summer, but has arguably struggled for two reasons, because of the different system that Spurs play, and also because Aurier has played well. But the mad thing was that Aurier last week, through a hissy fit, left the ground at half-time during the Liverpool game, and you wonder what his situation will be now going forward. It gives Matt Doherty an opportunity. I thought he might be in the team for the Brighton game. The fact that he didn't start was disappointing. And Mourinho, obviously, there's a degree of unrest now with the fact that Spurs' form has nosedived. And Mourinho will be looking for maybe answers out of that. And the answers he'll be looking for is defensively. I think it's 1 clean sheet now in 9 games for Spurs. So he's going to be looking at Doherty, he's going to be looking at Reguilon, he's going to be looking at Aurier, he's going to be looking at Alderweireld, Dyer, Rodon, Sanchez, all of these players, because I don't think Højbjerg is a problem. I think Højbjerg has been one of the best players we've had this season. So I would be worried for Matt Doherty a bit. He needs to get in favour with the manager, and if the manager is under pressure, which José is, and because of the narrative of José, because of the season, the way it went south at Chelsea so quickly and the way it went south at Manchester United, there is that narrative now that José, if he loses the momentum as a manager, and it's happening quite quickly at Spurs, then who's going to be the scapegoat for that on the pitch?
John, I'd imagine that Jose Mourinho has to have a look at himself when it comes to his defensive system as well, though, because, as you mentioned, they brought in two very attacking fullbacks in Reguilón and Doherty during the summer transfer window. The idea would have been, whether it's 3 centre-backs or 2 centre-backs, you're going to play with 2 wing-backs that get up the pitch. For a period of time, he played with a flat-back 4, which didn't suit Matt Doherty at all. Even in the centre of his defence, you saw Alderweireld, who they spent all the money on last year on a contract extension, sitting on the bench, watching Roland make a mistake for that Liverpool third goal. It just seems so much chopping and changing from Mourinho from a defensive point of view is not helping anyone inside, whether it's a back 4 or a back 5 currently.
Yeah, but you also have to wonder if the defenders are good enough centrally. Is Dyer a central defender, really? To me, I know he's Jose's guy, and there's the link with Portugal and that, but to me, he's never really convinced me as a central defender. And he was playing with Alderweireld on a regular basis earlier in the season. But I don't get the sense that you had Vertonghen and Alderweireld there, and they were rock solid, absolutely rock solid at their peak under Pochettino. They played for Belgium, obviously, they played at Ajax together. You don't get that sense of, you know, when you always talk about central defenders, Ferdinand and Vidic or John Terry at Chelsea, there is a solidity and a fulcrum at the club. At the moment, I get the sense of Spurs every time I watch them that it's Højbjerg and Sissoko or Højbjerg and whoever looking to guard the back 4. Not too dissimilar to the Manchester United situation, but the problem Spurs have is that everything is dependent then on Kane and Son delivering on the break. Now, they did spectacularly for a while, but now Kane is injured and Spurs don't seem to have any ideas about how they're going to start attacking and winning matches and actually having shots on target under a team that is meant to spring from defence. And I just think defensively, I still wouldn't trust the Spurs central defenders. Then that puts pressure on the fullbacks, and I think that's what we've seen recently.
Not sure if you can trust Hugo Lloris either, John.
No,
he palmed out a couple of goals last week. Probably should have come out to claim that Mane cross for the Firmino goal as well. The errors for this have been going on for quite a while now with Hugo Lloris. This isn't a new thing that he's making mistakes either.
No, it's not. And once again, if you're talking about the club captain and a World Cup winner and a World Cup winning captain, when he makes mistakes, that puts pressure on everybody else because you're not expecting somebody of that stature to be making mistakes. But he has always been a bit susceptible to those type of mistakes, Hugo Lloris, and it was poor, that parry last week. And the thing about Hugo Lloris is he has that in his game, and it's the consistency of it. And if you're not sure of the consistency, what does that say to the people in front of you if they're not certain about their own performances? And there's just a brittleness there. Jose's always been very good defensively as a manager, and he still hasn't got it right. Now, we defended Joe Rodon the other day, and Joe Rodon is a player for the future, but Spurs still haven't got it right. They didn't do any business in the transfer window. Bale has been, I would say, a flop, and there's just a feeling that who in the team is going to pick it up and lead, and the only people I've really seen that from are Son, Kane and Højbjerg. Haven't really seen it from anybody else.
John, we're going to get stuck into Patrick Reed in just a moment, but let us know what's happening in the world of sport, first of all.
Well, I just spoke about transfers there. Shane Long making a move on transfer deadline day last night. He joining Bournemouth from Southampton on loan until the end of the season. Southampton bringing in Takumi Minamino on loan from Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp's side bringing in 2 defenders. Ben Davies joining from Preston on a permanent deal for a fee of £2 million, and Schalke defender Ozan Kabak joining the Premier League champions on an initial loan deal with the option to buy in the summer. However, Joe Matip has been ruled out for the rest of the season with an ankle ligament injury. Everton in a bit of business as well. Josh King joining from Bournemouth for a fee in the region of £5 million. West Brom bringing in Ainsley Maitland-Niles, rather on loan from Arsenal. The Arsenal youngster Joe Willock going to Newcastle on loan. Celtic taking Everton right back John Joe Kenny on loan. Troy Parrott obviously going to Ipswich Town. His stint at Millwall ending. Aaron McAniff joining Hearts from Shamrock Rovers for $200,000. So these are kind of the main things that happen on transfer deadline day. Tonight, 4 matches again. Man United can go level on points with Manchester City at the top of the Premier League. The Red Devils hosting Southampton at Old Trafford from 8:15. Newcastle and Crystal Palace also kicking off at 8:15. First up at 6 o'clock, Arsenal away to Wolves. Sheffield United and West Brom meeting at Bramall Lane. GAA saying it would be irresponsible for counties to return to collective training at this time, but the association hasn't ruled out the National League starting in March. The organisation's COVID-19 advisory group will reconvene in a fortnight. And Ireland engaged in talks with the English, Welsh and Scottish unions about a joint bid for the 2031 World Cup. Ireland bid for the 2023 competition, but they lost out to France. Australia seen as front runners for the 2027 tournament.
Right. Get building those railways and the better infrastructure right now is what I say to nail that World Cup bid. John, Patrick Reed, we were listening to Lawrence Donegan talking about him a moment ago. But before we kind of get into the analysis of this, just explain what happened here. I guess this is Reed taking the saying to ask for forgiveness rather than permission a little bit too literally.
It was on Saturday. The Farmers Insurance opened this tournament in California on the USPGA Tour. His ball went in the rough, and he went over and he asked a spotter, a volunteer, did the ball bounce? The spotter said it didn't, and Patrick Reed said that the ball was embedded and moved the ball, then sought a ruling on it so that he could, that the drop was okay. And then what he effectively did, he walked up to the ball and he moved the ball without calling over his playing partners, or he made a presumption around the fact that the spotter told him that the ball didn't bounce. So he said the ball was embedded. He was the only person who saw the lie. And then the ball was moved, and then somebody did go and check it, and they confirmed that. He didn't get a penalty. He didn't get a two-shot deduction. The same thing happened to Rory McIlroy at the tournament, and Rory McIlroy got no sanction either and got no controversy around him. So Patrick Reed didn't break any rules, but Patrick Reed's reputation precedes him, because there's been incidents in the past at the Hero World Challenge in 2019 where he was penalised for improving his line of bunker, and Shane Ryan, the journalist, made accusations or reported accusations from him at the University of Georgia that there was accusations of cheating. There has been incidents in Patrick Reed's career that have been building on a narrative that he sometimes requires questions to be asked of him, and it just fits the narrative.
If this wasn't Patrick Reed on Saturday, people might have taken the whole thing at face value, right? This idea that the spotter thought it was embedded, they would have kind of believed that excuse. But it seems that, as you say, Patrick Reed said this, and now there is suspicion around that.
Well, the spotter said that the ball didn't bounce. Patrick Reed asked the spotter if the ball had bounced. The spotter said the ball didn't bounce. The video showed that the ball did bounce. If a ball bounces, how can it be embedded? It's not a cannonball, it's a golf ball. But the issue really is here that Patrick Reed didn't break any rules, but there's a reputational aspect to Patrick Reed's career, especially after that issue with the bunker in the Hero World Challenge. He's not the most popular guy on tour, and you can see that reaction from the likes of Xander Schauffele and Lanto Griffin about the incident, that they're not happy about it. But the issue for me, that he just went up and he moved it. He asked the lady the question, went up, moved the ball. And there was a presumptuousness towards it. And also there was a lack of thought to pause and go, hold on a second, what's the situation here? What is the rule? Maybe he just knows it, that is the rule. And do I need to maybe bring my playing partners in? Do I need to call a referee over to have a look at this? That was the thing I took out of it. And it just fits the narrative. And therefore you're going to have the controversy, because people looking back at the past of Patrick Reed would go, oh, Patrick Reed's done something again that might not be completely within the spirit of the game.
John, I think kind of further to Owen's point there, we saw what happened 18 hours or so later when it happened to Rory McIlroy. The people kind of assumed, because McIlroy has this reputation of being almost too honest, where previously he's taken shot penalties through his own honesty, that there was no question marks over Rory McIlroy because of who he is. But because it's Patrick Reed, there's always that suspicion. And also from just watching the incident live on Saturday night, I think when the rules official was eventually called over to have a look at where the ball was supposedly embedded, there was a kind of a dodginess about the way that Patrick Reed presented it, where he said, look, you can kind of see here where I had to use my finger to move the ball that it was definitely embedded. Even if he didn't break a rule, there's that feeling, I think, for a lot of golf fans that the spirit of the rule was broken, if not a rule itself. Yeah, and that's because Patrick Reed was the only person to see where the ball was. Because he'd moved it by the time, it's almost like it's a crime scene and you move a piece of evidence. Well, no, you moved the evidence. So I'm not saying this is a crime scene, but I'm just saying that you moved, rather than bringing over the rules official to make a judgment on it, as you say there, immediately, he moved the ball. And he moved the ball. Because he moved the ball, therefore, it becomes a questionable situation. And because there have been incidents in the past,
people are going to go, even if Patrick Reed did completely the right thing, and the rules will say that he did the right thing, there is issues in the past, his reputation precedes him, and therefore you have a swirl of controversy and over 1 million views on the PGA Tour Twitter about the incident itself.
Are you surprised, John, that the PGA Tour actually made as much of a deal of this as they did? Because they put that video, which is about 2.5 minutes long, as their pinned tweet overnight on Saturday and into Sunday afternoon. They drew quite a bit of attention to what happened here.
Yeah, it's ratings. It's ratings. It's ratings. What I will say is Patrick Reed does not care what John Duggan, Will O'Callaghan and Owen Sheehan thinks one iota about this. Patrick Reed has got a neck like a jockey's, whatever. Patrick Reed, he went and he absolutely beat the crap out of everybody in that tournament and won by 5 shots at the Farmers Insurance Open and showed the kind of mental fortitude that Rory McIlroy would be loving right now. Rory McIlroy missing short putts, not consistent with his game. Patrick Reed just finding the fairway and just beating the hell out of everybody, as he did at the Masters in 2018 and as he's done all his career. He is the heel. He's the villain. He doesn't care what you think. He's just going to go and win golf tournaments. I don't think it's a popularity contest for him. But looking enough in my career, I've been able to do 6 Opens. I've been able to do Irish Opens. I've been able to see these guys up close and personal. The public image of golfers has been very genteel, and sportsmanship is a huge thing, and it's all about the gentlemanly aspect of the game and all this kind of stuff. Doesn't really correlate with what I would have seen, in that these guys are very, very selfish individual people that live in a bubble, and you have to be selfish in such a cutthroat business that it's a bit like acting. Once you make it on the tour, you make it, but if you don't make it, you don't make it. You either make it or you don't, and like in any elite sport. And I would feel that they're not involved in team sports. That's why the Ryder Cup is such a special thing, or the President's Cup or whatever, letters, because it only comes around every couple of years. And that's why people are so desperate to get onto the team and have that camaraderie and have that sense of fun and a team environment, which you would see every single week in a football or a rugby or a GAA team. These guys live in an individual bubble. Like when the Tiger Woods scandal broke, there was, I'd say, a lot of shock among his peers because they had no idea what Tiger Woods was doing with his personal life, once the 18 holes have been played. And I think there is a degree of the fact that Patrick Reed is a loner. People might, if you can relate to somebody, like as you said there, Will, about Rory, people can go, well, you know what, Rory's a good guy. Rory's believes in the integrity of the game. As you said there, at the PGA last year, he actually took a worse lie than he would have had at Harding Park. And he's the kind of guy you would know that would call a penalty on himself. So integrity does follow you throughout a career, but also people got to realise that just because it seems very genteel on the surface and everybody shaking hands and waiting for the other player to play, marking your ball, all that kind of stuff, doesn't mean these guys are not like hugely competitive internally and will do anything to climb over another person within the rules to win.
John, one thing I find interesting in this, though, is where the golf community seem to get offended and what actually gets publicity in terms of what golfers do. Because there's probably not too many club golfers who are watching or listening to us this morning who haven't maybe taken a dodgy drop or potentially marked the ball incorrectly themselves.
You're not one of those, Will, now. You're not one of those people.
No, not at all. I mean, but not if we've done it previously, not in a tournament where there's £1 million on the line. But I just think it's interesting that people are, talking so much about this, yet there was minimal to no coverage about Justin Thomas and the homophobic slur the week before.
Yeah, Stephen Doyle was tweeting about that yesterday, and Justin Thomas once again is tweeting about that. I just woke up this morning and checked my phone and saw Justin Thomas once again, apologising. Obviously he's lost Ralph Lauren. He got picked up on a hot mic saying what he said, and that isn't good. And Justin Thomas, the thing about it is with Justin Thomas, I know there's not much brouhaha about it, and I wouldn't say that the PGA Tour are closing ranks in it, but that will follow Justin Thomas now for the rest of his career. Like Sergio Garcia made controversial comments at a dinner about Tiger Woods a few years ago. I still think about that when I think about Sergio Garcia. He made a joke, just a kind of a joke which was in bad taste. But the Justin Thomas thing, I know, I'm not saying it's been brushed under the carpet what he said, but that will follow Justin Thomas. And what is interesting when you see the reaction to Justin Thomas putting out the tweet is that people don't, just like stay strong, bro, cancel culture, people just want people cancelled, and I don't know if that's the right reaction from the public either. But the PGA Tour is a strange beast. Like they don't really, if they're going to get rid of somebody in terms of a sanction or whatever, or like suspend them from the tour for a while, they never admit that. They never publish transgressions. They never. It's all done in a closed way, and they need to change that. I think it needs to be a bit more open in terms of how they, administer what I would say is punishments and rules transgressions for people, so that there's a little bit more transparency over where this thing is going, so you don't have 1 million hits for Patrick Reed.
All right, John Duggan, thanks a million.
All right, guys. Cheers.
John Duggan there. It is 5 minutes to 9 on this Tuesday morning. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Give you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Big day coming up on OTB Sports Radio. As ever, from midday, we've got the Bernard Brogan podcast with Ty Kennelly. 1 o'clock then, OTB Gold with Nigel Mansell. 3 p.m. Dadcast this afternoon. And then Mount Rushmore from 4 o'clock, the North Dublin edition. 6 p.m. OTB Gold features an interview with Jason Sherlock. And as ever, on a weekday evening, 7 o'clock, Off the Ball is live. It is time now, though, to get back into our Premier League TV pundits and the World Cup of Premier League television pundits. There were some big results yesterday in our group stages. Let me run through the results. So, Group A, Jamie Carragher absolutely ran away with it. Kenny Cunningham, though, beat Rio Ferdinand to second place. 800 years all put into the past right now. What a win for Ireland over England. Kenny Cunningham defeats Rio Ferdinand. The people have spoken. 14.7% to 13%. What an amazing result for Kenny Cunningham. He powers through to the second round. Group B then, Roy Keane hammered everybody. 85.1% of the vote. You would almost make him favourite for this entire thing at this point, given that first round performance. It was set to be the Battle of Cork. Well, there's going to be 2 Cork men coming out of this group because Damien Delaney with 13.5% of the vote is also going through. Glenn Johnson and Robbie Savage couldn't even muster up a single % each. And this is almost 1,500 votes. A desperate performance from Johnson and Savage. Probably didn't expect him to get through, but didn't expect him to perform that badly either. Group C then. Another powerhouse here in Gary Neville with 88.6% of the vote. Really, I mean, there wasn't much to separate Owen Hargreaves and Paul Scholes, but it didn't matter because Kevin Doyle came through with 6.7% of the vote and is going through from that group. Group D then, Graham Souness topped the poll here, and probably the best performance from somebody who came second in the group so far, Alex Scott, hoovering up 30% of the vote, knocking out Martin Keown and Joe Cole in the process. In Group E, is this a shock? Peter Crouch beating Chris Sutton. Either way, they're both going through. Peter Crouch got well over half the vote. Chris Sutton with about a quarter of the vote. Group F, Alan Shearer finished top with 47.6% of the vote. Jamie Redknapp is also going through there with Eni Aluko and Steve McManaman dropping out. Group G then, Micah Richards topped this poll, which is little surprise, 52.6% of the vote. Patrice Ever with about 30%. And then finally, Group H, Ian Wright hammered everybody here with 61%. But we did have our closest race for a second here. It was between Glenn Hoddle and Jermaine Jenas. And Jenas pipped him by 0.8% of the vote. 17% to Glenn Hoddle, 16.2%, with Dion Dublin coming in last with 5.8%. So we move on to the last 16 this morning. And I mean, these ties just don't get any less salivating than this one, to be honest, because we've got Jamie Carragher versus Damien Delaney in the first of our last 16 ties, which is a bit of a cracker. Then you've got Gary Neville versus Alex Scott. The second section of the draw then sees Peter Crouch go up against Jamie Redknapp. And then Micah Richards goes up against Jermaine Jenas. I think they're both going to be hammerings there. I think Crouch and Richards are going to be meeting each other in the quarterfinal. Then it is an all-Ireland battle in the third quarter of the draw. Roy Keane versus Kenny Cunningham. They've had many a conversation, I'm sure, in Ireland camps before. Can Kenny upset the odds here and dethrone Roy Keane? Because it looks like he's sitting on the throne right now. It looks like the people have already spoken and are picking Roy Keane as their favourite pundit. But Kenny Cunningham, can he knock him off top spot? Graham Souness versus Kevin Doyle will play the winner of that. And then in the final quarter of the draw, Alan Shearer is going to face Chris Sutton. And Ian Wright versus Patrice Evra. God, Will, you can't really describe how tasty some of these ties are.
Yeah, there's some big ones that have worked out there with just the way the groups were drawn. The big losers, though, Owen, that I've noticed as you went through the results, because of the way they polled as well. I think that's 3 BT pundits that made it through in the end from the groups. So, there's a very clear sign from our Twitter followers, at least, that the BT Sport pundits aren't particularly loved here.
It's a very interesting little dynamic here. You're obviously going deep into the demographics here. You're the John King of OTB this morning, digging into what people are voting. How are they voting in the suburbs? What are the suburbs saying about Jamie Carragher this morning is what I want to know. It's interesting because we had this conversation yesterday about how people tend to view pundits, and you're probably right. If you did a straw poll, if Sky and BT both showed the same game, you'd probably see a lot of online Twitter bashing of BT pundits ahead of Sky pundits.
Yeah, because you had the groups fairly evenly drawn. I mean, the one that Chris Sutton came out of, actually, I think had 2 or 3 BT pundits in it. So I'm not sure if that maybe helped when it came to his vote there. But you notice that all of the really heavy pollers, in terms of, say, the 3 biggest votes that we saw there, were for the 3 main Sky Sports pundits in Jamie Carragher, Gary Neville, Roy Keane. Then there's obviously a certain amount of Irish bias there, with Damien Delaney doing well, Kevin Doyle doing well, which you would expect, and Kenny doing very well in terms of his group. But you would think there's a huge endorsement there of the people who are on Sky Sports, and then Alan Shearer topping the last of the 8 groups there. But definitely a very clear indication. If you were someone working in Sky Sports last night, you'd be thinking our pundits are pretty popular in Ireland currently.
That first tie, as you mentioned there, Carragher against Delaney, is an interesting one. If you're a Manchester United fan, rather, who do you vote for there? Damien Delaney's been the man who has been leading the anti-Ole Gunnar Solskjaer train, and Jamie Carragher is a Liverpool legend.
Yeah, talk about Sophie's choice. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think United fans might just skip that one potentially, because Damien, and I have to give him credit on this, he has stuck to his guns. Even at a point where Manchester United were doing particularly well over a dozen games or so between late November and through December, even when they went to the top of the Premier League, even after they beat Liverpool in the FA Cup, Damien Delaney has stuck to his guns and said that he thinks Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is not going to bring success back to Manchester United. Even when they were going well, he was picking out points where he felt they weren't doing well. And to his credit, I think he came on directly after the FA Cup game onto Off the Ball last Monday to speak to Joe. Damien Delaney's not going to back down on his position. I think there's a lot of credit to be had there. But he is going up against one of the really high-profile candidates in Jamie Carragher. It won't just be Liverpool fans who vote for Carragher. There's a real, genuine love, I think, from football fans for both Carragher and Neville.
Carragher's the best on UK TV, isn't he?
I think so, yeah. I think him and Neville are definitely the 2 best. I think there's very little to pick between the 2. I wish Sky wouldn't pair them on commentary games on their own former teams. Particularly galling is when you've got Carragher and Neville for some kind of perceived sense of impartiality when Manchester United play Liverpool. It wasn't a great game at Anfield a few weeks ago anyway, but then you add on to the fact that it feels more like fan TV when you put them on. I find Neville and Carragher far more insightful. Well, their best work is always on Monday Night Football, where there's space to breathe and where they can have a chat about tactics and break down a topic or 2 across that kind of longer section than when they're on analysis with Martin Tyler anyway. But I just find when you put the 2 of them on, they're still so tied to the clubs that they played for. And even Carragher has a lot of love for Everton and finds himself on Everton games quite a bit too. I just think go for a commentator, and this is a wider point among TV punditry, who don't have that kind of tie to the teams that they're watching.
Do you know what, Will? I actually think just put Neville on his own with Martin Tyler, or put Carragher on his own with Martin Tyler, even if it is Liverpool versus Manchester United, chances are Gary Neville will be a professional and actually call it as he sees it. I don't think the audience need to be treated with such a juvenile attitude that they need to have somebody from their team represented there, that there's some sort of quota that needs to be made, and also the fact that this is only done for Liverpool and Manchester United. If you're, say, theoretically, Will, an Arsenal fan, for example, watching Arsenal against Manchester United last Saturday, would you have been offended that they didn't have Alan Smith on co-commentator because Gary Neville was there? No, you wouldn't, because you're probably a right-minded person who realises that Gary Neville will probably call it as he sees it, and there's no need to be so tribal about whether or not your team is represented in the commentary booth. They're both really good at what they do, and I agree with you. I find that sort of double co-commentator thing to be a bit of a stretch, to be quite honest.
Yeah, look, I think the ideal is to try and get someone who's neutral to the 2 teams who are playing. Even more ideal is to get a neutral who's going to be a really good contributor across multiple teams. Second best is if you've got your best people on, even if they're associated with it. And then 50 miles below that is putting 2 people on just because you don't want Manchester United Liverpool fans giving you hassle or switching off the TV. And that's ultimately what Sky Sports did that day. I think Sky said that game, despite it being absolutely terrible last Sunday week, was their highest rated game that they had shown in Premier League history. So obviously they know that the viewers are there. They don't want to annoy people, but they annoy neutrals among us who are trying to watch the match and just, take in the action, as opposed to what feels sometimes like a little bit of forced banter when it comes to the Liverpool-Manchester United rivalry between Carragher and Neville. And I say that as someone who actually enjoys the back and forth between them, whether it's on TV or on social media. I really like both of them. And I'd be surprised if they're not in the semi-finals along with Roy Keane. I feel for Kenny. That's a horrible draw to get into round of 16 to have to go up against Roy Keane, because Keane is not the guy who's going to give you the breakdown of the tactics and the play-by-play. Well, Keane speaks his mind, and he's one of the most entertaining analysts that's on TV currently. And this season, I think Sky have started to unlock his potential. Well, maybe going back to restart, where they started using Micah Richards a little bit more alongside him. I think they've got a nice little panel group for the weekends on Sky now, with Graham Souness, Roy Keane and Micah Richards. There's a really good chemistry between them, and Dave Jones is usually quite good at getting a conversation out of all three. It feels so much less forced than BT. I watched Liverpool against Spurs on BT last Thursday night and stayed on for the extended coverage afterwards because I was intrigued to see what the managers would say afterwards. And just Jake Humphrey is not able to get the material from the guys who are in studio in the same way as Dave Jones can. It's funny how less is more sometimes.
Yeah. I'm just happy that we have Roy Keane involved in a World Cup for once. I think we should just be happy that he's here and that he's taking part. You're right on the whole revenue.
I'm old enough to remember him at the 1994 World Cup, where Roy Keane was pretty good as a young player. Everyone obviously remembers 2002, but he was pretty good in 94. Yeah, he was. But I only focus on one here. You're right on the revenue point. This is the whole reason why we're doing this, by the way, that everybody has signed up to Sky Sports, or everybody's just watching a hell of a lot more football than they ordinarily would, and everybody's now obsessed with what are they actually seeing and what are they actually hearing. So hence the World Cup of Pundits. We are going to continue this all week. We're going to get into the quarterfinals tomorrow, and you can go on to @OffTheBall AM on Twitter to vote for your favourite there in the last 16. Right, we're going to be bringing you some Ronan O'Gara and Mike Phillips from Monday Night Rugby at 9:30 this morning, but Graham Hunter is up next. We'll be back right after these.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
OTB. Long ball forward for Shaqiri to run onto. First time cross to Salah. He controls it and puts it past Fabianski. And that is a superb Liverpool counter-attacking goal.
OTB live commentary. Never miss the action right here on OTB Sports Radio. Keep up to date with the latest scores on the OTB Sports app. The OTB Sports app. Live score updates straight to your phone.
Bet smart this season with stat betting on the Boyle Sports app. For the first time ever, bet on shots, shots on target, tackles, passes, assists and more, all powered by Opta. Why not check out the hottest action on the biggest game of the week right now on the Boyle Sports app. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Need help? Contact gamblingcare.ie. 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
You're welcome back. It is 9:08 on this Tuesday morning. You're watching or listening to OTB AM. Let's have a look at some of the sports pages this morning, and we'll start with otbsports.com. You can get this on the OTB Sports app as well. Ronan O'Gara talking about how Ireland can beat Wales this weekend. Got plenty on Gary Neville there as well, talking about Lampard. And you've got Joel Matip to miss the rest of the season for Liverpool. Also talk there of Ben Davis and his signing for Liverpool from Preston, and how Upamecano was also wanted by Liverpool. So plenty of reaction to transfer deadline day on otbsports.com this morning. A couple of the sports pages this morning just to give you a flavour of what's happening. The Irish Times beginning their build-up to Ireland against Wales in the Six Nations. You've got a picture of Paul O'Connell leading the way this morning. And a man always prepared to do what makes him better. This is Johnny Waterson and Gavin Comiskey writing this morning about how the former Lions captain brings an aura, a work ethic and a humility that few others can match. That is the Irish Times this morning. The Irish Examiner then, Ned Quinn talking about hurling cynicism and how it needs to be tackled now. If you're just waking up, we were chatting to Donnchadh Boyle of the Irish Independent about this earlier on. You can catch this in the GAA streams. You'll catch it on YouTube as well. This is really growing legs at the moment, the conversation around cynicism in hurling, and that's something that's probably going to need to be done about it in the next little while. Ned Quinn says it needs to be tackled right now, and that is the lead in the Irish Examiner. The Daily Telegraph says England are going to be the first nation to limit heading. This is the FA committing to backing up new protocols with research with regards to concussion. The back of the Irish Daily Mirror goes with the headline, Jurgen Schopp. Klopp snaps up 2 bargain central defenders and admits we usually wouldn't be looking to buy from Preston. No offence to Preston North End there. And County's told to wait and see on training return is their lead on the GAA. The back of the Irish Daily Star this morning has Klopp hails Cab, Pool's double deal, but Matip's out for the season, while Clarets miss out on Collins, and GAA says March is still on. That is the Irish Daily Star this morning, and that is the lead on the back of the Irish Daily Mail as well. March is on is the main headline on the back of that this morning. GAA targeting league return for next month, and also, as mentioned by John a few moments ago, IRFU to form joint bid for 2031 World Cup. Next up is the Irish Sun. Be Red Devils. Ole wants nice lads to pile heat on referees. It is Manchester United against Southampton tonight at 8:15. And the Guardian then leads with an interview with Gregor Townsend. Coaching on Zoom is bizarre. On one call, there were 109 players. And also there's news in the back of the Guardian about Liverpool's double swoop for central defenders on transfer deadline day. The London Times then. United too nice to referees. Solskjaer admits players' attitude has cost them key decisions in games, while Liverpool loan deal for Kabak is also covered on the back of the London Times. The Herald then. Poole pounce on the double. Klopp bolsters sagging defence with Kabak and Davies deals. And the Irish Independent leaves with the GAA. They are going to delay call on 2021 start for 2 more weeks. And that is it from the sports pages this morning. Let's bring you a bit of Pat Nevin from last night. Here he is on Celtic's 10 in a row dreams going up in smoke.
I was doing a comedy show over here in the UK, Fighting Talk with Colin Murray. Yeah. And I said, it doesn't matter. My line was, it doesn't matter how much you pray. You can get those rosary beads down to the string. You have no chance this year. You're absolutely stuffed. And I'm allowed to say that because of my background. And it's sad times for Celtic because, you know, they came so close to the 10 in a row. And it's this mythical thing. You know, I remember watching the Celtic win the 9 in a row in the 60s and 70s and then played against Rangers. And I've got a quick wee story about that. They were going for 10 in a row. And I was playing against them the day they blew it because I was playing for Kilmarnock. And we beat Rangers at Ibrox 1-0. And it stuffed them. They had 2 games to go, and had they won that, they'd have gone on and won 10 in a row. So there are certain pubs in Glasgow where I am never allowed to buy a drink ever again. There are other pubs I'm never allowed in yet.
Yeah, Pat Nevin on last night's football show in conversation with Richie. You can catch the full thing back on the OTB Sports app. Go for the football show podcast there. Graham Hunter, how are things?
On the ground, actually. A grey morning, you'll be gutted to hear in Catalonia. Very grey indeed. Kind of a little bit like, I don't know, Leash or Clontarf this morning maybe. But other than that, buoyant, ready for you, ready to chat with your listeners, viewers.
I'm sure Will be able to give you a good breakdown of what the Midlands and what Laois is looking like over the last little while. Graham, we were just listening to Pat Nevin there a moment ago. We're going to chat about Spanish football in just a moment, but I actually just wanted to get your brief take on this. Sad times is how he summed it up for Celtic this season. What's your emotion been while seeing their decline this year?
My emotion is I wish I could invent a time machine and take us back to the middle 80s when Aberdeen won the title. And I'm like a Greek chorus, except singing on the sidelines, not about tragedy, about comedy. It's beautiful. The secret of all great comedy is timing, isn't it? And I don't know why. I mean, Pat's maybe, Pat's younger than me, maybe he was alive. I was alive, certainly, in watching football when Celtic did their first 9 in a row and Rangers. I think coached by Joe Wallace. Stopped them going 10. I remember the frantic nonsense. I was a football journalist in Scotland at the time that Vin Janssen came across and with his one season wonder won the title, stopped Walter Smith capitalising on the soonish years as well, and making it 9-0. And a TV commentator, Jock Brown, brother of the former Scotland manager, friend of mine, Craig Brown, was the general manager at Celtic. And I remember when they won that one title under Tim Jansen, to prevent Rangers doing the 10 in a row. They would on the final day, they would take the trophy back to Parkhead, and Tommy Boyd was the captain, and he was ready with the trophy to go out of the bus to the throng waiting outside Celtic Park, and John Brown nicked the trophy off, and the general manager was the one who thought he was the triumphant one. So these big explosions of fervour and two distinct colours in Scotland, if you're not an Old Firm fan, I'll genuinely bring sardonic smiles from the rest of us. As far as a football analysis is concerned, when Brendan Rodgers left, he left a Celtic that was in really good operating shape. The word about the training ground practices was that they'd been modernised, that there were systems. So I'm talking about the daily preparation, planning, recuperation, all of that not only keeps a team on the road, but keeps up with the times. And Neil Lennon smartly chose not to touch that which wasn't broke. And I'm unclear whether... no, that's wrong. That was a euphemism. I'm clear that across the club, there's been a stagnation of thinking. It's for those of your listeners that follow Celtic and Rangers, it's really clear that Peter Law going signifies that there's an admission on his part, as well as the club's part, that the change around the manager was necessary. And therefore, look, the overriding emotion I've got, which will matter less to you, is that I'm annoyed that Aberdeen aren't claiming second in this situation. Last April, I was in Scotland. I was at Murray Park interviewing Stephen Gerrard. I know Gary McAllister really well. I met Stephen Gerrard and interviewed him a few times before. I like him. We get on. And I watched their training. I looked at the staff they've got around them. I looked at their modernity, and I looked at the way in which they were having to, how would I phrase this? Their money supply was shorter. They needed, I think, to be tighter in not only their scouting, they signed, but how they developed the players that they had. I think they've been noticeably better at developing footballers that are on the staff than Celtic have of late. That's my opinion. But also, you could take the emotive names of Celtic and Rangers out of this and look at all great dynasties where one team dominates. And what usually happens at the end, it isn't just a juddering hope, but degeneration, rust, chaos, the abating of hunger. And I think that all of those elements are really present at Parkhead and at the Lennox Town training ground at the moment. And no harm to them, but, I'm absolutely broken up.
Graham, obviously Celtic have to go on this kind of period of renewal this summer, but I'm sure plenty of Liverpool fans who are watching us currently will be wondering how much Steven Gerrard has actually enhanced his reputation and how much he's learning about being Rangers manager over the last couple of seasons. Notwithstanding that Celtic have been a mess this season, Rangers have been tremendously consistent, and the feeling seems to be that Gerrard has done a really good job at Ibrox over the last 2 years.
Well, it doesn't answer immediately all the questions that the Rangers fans will have, but I feel reasonably authoritative about saying that the first thing anybody will cast at a successful manager who's come north from England or who wants to go down and coach in England will be the same mud as they threw at Van Dijk. It's only Scotland. Well, first of all, it hasn't been easy for Gerrard. The accusation is that if you got Scotland to do well, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's not. Rangers were in a powerless state when Gerrard took over. Their squad was formed of footballers who were nowhere good enough to compete with Celtic. And the chasing pack, whether it be Hibs and Hearts, trophy winners outside the Old Firm, Aberdeen knocking them over. And therefore, the construction. The club has many really good staff, and Steve Gerrard will be the first to say that. but he has a little like Klopp at Liverpool, given direction, personality, identity to the work. He sets standards. I think when I interviewed him, I asked him a question about certain people, and both of you will have come across them in sport, have just this oozing character that commands attention if you come in the room. There's an aura around them. Their word carries more weight. Whether if you looked at the words on paper, they might look, well, that's quite ordinary. Delivered by certain men and women in sport, they really carry an import, and people will follow you, and they'll retain them. And I asked Stephen Gerrard about that, because I think he evidently has that. And he said that he's had to work on it, that leadership, teaching, communication. He said that he's naturally shy, that although he's aggressive and competitive in the football atmosphere, he's had to develop himself. And I think you can see it. I think you can note it. So from a Liverpool perspective, one, I don't really expect Klopp to move on before the end of his contract, at which time I do expect him to move on. Two, I think that thus far, it's not as if he's taking over right now. You know, and not the Liverpool fans want him to. But thus far, if you said, how's the trajectory? He's on course to be the next Liverpool manager. And I, again, talking a lot more to Gary McAllister, because we chat about things beyond football and we just keep in touch. I can see similarities with Klopp, and what's more, Stephen Gerrard is not one of these people who said, well, I'm famous, I'm a celebrity, I was successful, that'll do. People just need to learn to follow me and take my judgment. And he works hard on his coaching skills. He works hard on the process of managing, whether it be managing upwards, managing the media, managing the way in which signings are made, who comes in, and what happens to them. So, it's a long way off before we have to use that litmus test against him at New Melwood and Liverpool. But anybody who thinks that he strolled this because Celtic are having a meltdown haven't been looking at the last few years, nor their consistently good record in Europe. I mean, excellent record in Europe, which means that very soon both two clubs in Scotland will be getting into the Champions League, with the champions of Scotland going straight into the group stage. Thank you, Stephen Gerrard.
Yeah. We should talk about what's happened in Barcelona as well over the last couple of days, Graham. A massive leak from El Mundo to El Mundo, I should say, and reported by them over the course of the weekend about Messi's 4-year contract, the most ever awarded to an athlete. They stated that it's ruined the club. Ronald Koeman has hit back saying, I don't understand how anyone can link Messi to Barca's ruin. And I guess the process at the moment is trying to weed out the rat at Barcelona Football Club. So plenty of drama here, Graham.
Yeah, it certainly means that Messi's kids aren't going to have to do a paper round, I would say. What's the question on? Who's the rat? Why is it out? Is he worth all that much money?
Do you agree with Ronald Koeman, first of all, that no one can, in their right mind, link Messi to Barca's ruin? Or do you believe that actually you look at the figures and you look at how Barcelona are struggling and say, you know what, maybe there's a case to be made here that they really should have pushed them out the door last summer?
Those are two different things. One, what any performer can negotiate via agents, be it stage, screen, football, good luck to them. If anybody's trying to say, I think you should have been a bit more responsible and thought about the future of the club when you asked for more because your performance is the greatest ever. Well, go and eat your hat, go and sit in the toilet. Are the numbers extraordinary? Yes. Are they all new? No. Two colleagues of mine, Sam Marsden, Moises Sherenz and ESPN last November wrote about the overall loyalty bonus and the yearly bonus, the bonus for signing on again and the overall. So those two gigantic figures were already out. What would enrage me analytically from the sidelines, and sometimes we project in our business, if I were Messi or his representatives, obviously a scoop's a scoop, well done, but whoever leaked this has been trying to do damage to Messi and tried to say exactly what you've paraphrased El Mundo is saying, which is look, it's all Messi's fault, because the numbers to your working man and woman, particularly when people are struggling for their health and well-being, their lives, their livelihood, their fears about their kids. You look at those numbers, and it's easy. It's what do they call it? The modern people, gaslighting or dog whistling. Dog whistling, isn't it? That's a better. So, to me, and you know me as a restrained, mild-mannered Scot, you know, I'm holding back with my language now. Good luck to Armando, who got given it. So to me, it's not massively great journalism. It's interesting. So it sells a paper. Hats off. In terms of the behaviour of somebody that's trying to screw Leo Messi and screw any chances he has of the club once they have a new president offering him a new contract, it's disgusting. I hope they find them. And really, if they've leaked confidential documents for no good reason other than mischief, then I hope they get fined and jailed. You know, that's my point of view. If a journalist uses a source, works on them, develops them, and gets them to leak something, there's still a big issue in terms of confidentiality and criminality. But if somebody just goes, hey, there's an easy dump, go and take that and do damage with it, then that's not my kind of stuff. And Messi, I don't know who's fit to sit and judge whether he justifies every penny of his hundreds of millions. But not as a Barca fan, simply as somebody who adores football, somebody who's been around it. And just try to imagine, anybody watching Off the Ball at the moment, both of you, try to imagine that you were a Barca fan, you really cared about the club. What's he given you? Not just points and trophies and Ballon d'Or. It's like an injection. You know, see all your multivitamins. If you go and watch Leo Messi every second week at the Camp Nou, or you can travel to Stamford Bridge or Kiev, or you go to Berlin or Roma, and he scores and makes, and you're watching the greatest thing ever. It changes your life. It makes you better as a person. And even for neutrals, I think it's just utterly nonsensical the way they framed it. Does it make Barcelona's board and their management of resources look foolhardy? Yeah. Is it those same people who've made the details available? In my opinion, it probably is. That's my opinion, not off the balls. And therefore, good luck to Messi. Idiots who run the club, we knew that already. Although I don't think they've really shone journalistically here, because it was just dumped upon them. And does it mean that Messi's more likely to be leaving than going? Barcelona still owe him 60-odd million because they're in debt to everybody. And can they offer him a contract? Never mind that contract. Can they offer him a contract equivalent to what Harry Kane's getting now? I don't know if they can. So whether Messi wants to stay or not, it may not now be the issue. It may be the issue that Barcelona can't afford to keep him. Why is Messi in the spotlight for ire if the club where he'd prefer to stay has mismanaged his playing, administrative and financial resources so badly that they can't keep him? There's the people in the clown hats and the red noses.
Graham, there was kind of a lot of moving parts at the weekend too. Like, it's only a few weeks ago that Messi said, you know, he wants to be at Barcelona. Even if he does move after this, he'd love to come back and coach. So he said he never wants to fall out with the club. He was speaking about how Koeman's been a positive influence and got them back in a more serious manner again. You've got Griezmann scoring 5 goals in the last month, finally finding a bit of form. Pedri's been dovetailing nicely with Messi. There's that feeling that maybe he might stay. Then the presidential elections come around. This gets leaked. Pochettino has been in the media over the last 24 hours saying PSG would love to pair him with Mbappe and his old mate Neymar next season. All this is kind of very interesting timing, but the feeling would probably be that this has to be, you know, another breakdown in the relationship between Messi and the club potentially, given that it had to be someone within the club who's leaked this.
Yeah, you're on delicate ground there. I see your point. I don't want to argue too strongly against it, because people's definition of the club might be a little bit different to if you're working around it and looking at them, might be a little bit different to the way we appreciate it. So anybody who's involved in negotiating, giving him that contract, is now not at the club. Those, in my opinion, those who are most likely to have leaked it either aren't at the club or are part of the temporary administration that will be gone. So the people he's negotiating with are going to be completely new. Maybe not completely new to him if Laporta wins the election. So the residual ill feeling, it's there. And senior players, hard-nosed players, many of whom people would criticise for being a cabal that have more influence than they should. Alba, Piqué, Busquets, Messi now, Suarez in the past. There'll be some harsh things being said and done over the last few days, in my opinion, by all the senior players, not by Messi. Because this is the club that used private detectives to follow their players. This is the club that used a firm that was hammering some of its own players and some of the potential new people coming in social media. They've been disgraceful practices, well, you're right, under Jose Maria Bartomeu, who's been an atrocious man to be in charge of a big football club. You summarised the playing side of it correctly. Out of the blue, with them having looked like puppets with the strings cut, suddenly the show is good again. I think it's too late when the title. I think there's too many more storms coming. Well, between now and the presidential elections, nobody bought in the transfer market. And there are patches of the squad where they're bare, and therefore I don't think they catch Atleti and don't win the title. Are they good enough to win the Champions League? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Can they win the Cup? Yes. Will that be massive for Messi and staying? No. But I think that if there are temptations at Manchester City who still want him. They may not put Guardiola, but the owners do. There is absolutely no question PSG want him and think they can get him. The idea of Neymar and Mbappe and Messi up front must be attractive even to Messi. And does he know and trust Pochettino? Yes. So therefore, even though I think it would be very strong for this family man who dotes on his 3 boys and his wife, and to take them to a new country, a colder country, a greyer country in the middle of a pandemic, to countries, either France or Britain, where they don't speak the language. These things don't play on everybody's mind, but will they play on Messi's mind? Yes. And therefore, were he to look at the 3, and I think it's 3 options, and say, well, I want to stay, I go back to my point. Well, I'm not certain that Barcelona say, oh, well, that's great. That's great. There's 25, 30, 40, 50 million, 10 million a season. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to. So it might be that he goes by default, but I think all options are still on the table. And I do not think, to answer your question specifically, that what's been done this week, it will have put his nose out of joint. But he knew that when he went on against Athletic on Sunday night. He was fouled and body checked like he was against Athletic in the Super Cup. Didn't lose his temper. He's got it contained. Well, I think on balance, he probably leaves. But is the decision made? In my opinion, it's not. And would he potentially stay if the conditions were right? Yes.
You mentioned Atletico there as well, Graham. They're the winter champions in Spain. Only 10 goals conceded in the 19 games. They're 50 points accumulated, which is a remarkable start to the season for Diego Simeone's side. A bit like 7 years ago, they pick up a Barcelona striker cheaply and he scores goals, which might well help them win the league in Luis Suarez. How impressed have you been by Atletico? Because 10 points clear with the game in hand is an incredibly commanding position at the halfway point.
I'm impressed for various different reasons. They're playing a slightly advanced brand of football. They're far more keen on possession and circulation of the ball. They're often more attractive to watch. When they're ahead, they less often say, right, Fort Knox, everybody close it down, never mind the next, Jose Mourinho Spurs style football. They've moved away from that a little bit. When they've been in trouble, they got torn apart for various different reasons by Gerrard in the Madrid Clásico. And from that point onwards, they've done nothing but win. They've had comeback victories against Eibar, against Alaves, against Valencia. Cadiz, it wasn't a comeback win, but Cadiz waged war on them, clawed them back every time they got ahead. They still won 4-2 without senior players in their side. Right now, they've got all the components. I've been calling them champions-elect since November, and I think it was in September I wrote that this has to be Atleti's title. They will win it. There are things that can go wrong, because if they were to lose Luis Suarez, there isn't a natural replacement, even though Dembele's in the squad now. If they were to lose Oblak, then all bets are off for the moment, because he's that important, doesn't have a proper replacement. Grubic, the Croatian, I think, goalkeeper, is untested and lacking in experience. So, enjoyable, yes. Will they win the title? In my opinion, they definitely will. It will be their third title in 44 years, so it's exciting. They're the best side consistently, not every week, but the best side in Spain right now. And, if I can go full circle about the old firm and 10-year-old, the secret of all great comedy is timing. So when Bartomeu went to one of his strikers in the summer and said, "Don't worry, you won't have to cope, you won't have to deal with Luis Suarez anymore. I'm getting him out of the club." Well, listen, Presidente, lads, have you ever seen one club winning a title and you give title assist the president of another club? Great job there. Clown shoes.
Yeah, a statue, a nice bronze statue of Bartomeu to be built.
As long as it's got a red nose, I have to make the point again. As long as that statue's got a wee red nose.
Yeah. Listen, Graham, always great catching up with you. Thanks a million for taking the call. It is 9:34 on this Tuesday morning. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. I should tell you we're live from 7:30 every weekday morning, and from tomorrow morning we're going to be spending a bit of time in Perth with Rob Kearney before crossing over to Melbourne to hear from Aileen Gilroy, who starred in the AFLW over the course of the weekend. We'll also be talking football as well and bringing you the AM agenda. Right now, though, we're bringing you former Lions roommates Mike Phillips and Ronan O'Gara looking ahead to the Six Nations this weekend.
Yeah, I think it is a solution, but I think it removes, I think, a massive advantage for South Africa if they're playing in Australia. For them, I think it's a little bit backward in the fact that an awful lot of, I suppose, things are accepted on the way to grounds that wouldn't be accepted normally, in terms of, like, you actually do get pelted with oranges, and you do get abused coming off the bus, and you do get shouted at, but not in a vicious or in a kind of a threatening way. But there's that hostile environment when you know on certain grounds there that you're going to be kind of verbally abused from the stand, and that happens in some games too. And I think that tests you as a person, as a competitor as well. And I think for us, Lions tours was going into the Lions Den, essentially going to test yourself right in the bear pit of a country's home ground, but obviously in the middle of a pandemic, and if the game is on its knees, this is something that has to be, I suppose, contemplated. But for me, the ideal situation is if it can't be played this year in South Africa, it would be great that you just do it next year in South Africa. But behind closed doors, I think, doesn't appeal to anybody, especially to players, and they're not pieces of meat. They need to be really well looked after. So hopefully, for me, it will be South Africa this summer, but if not, South Africa the summer after, and then potentially the option of Australia as a backup if the finances are that stretched.
Mike, how would you see this one going?
Yeah, I think it's a shame. I think it's great to the fact that in 2009 they were the World Cup winners as well, so that was fantastic to go down there and try and beat the world champions, obviously in the Lions series. And yeah, it's the same thing now. So it'll be a shame if it's held somewhere else. And it's all about the fans, isn't it? And that's what it's all about. Testing yourself in front of huge crowds. You're an entertainer. And, playing rugby, you're an entertainer. You want to show off your skills against the very best in the world. It's not the same without these crowds. So hopefully, it can be held in South Africa, which would be perfect. But I guess it's all up in the air, really, isn't it? So we have to wait and see.
Mike, on a spectrum of forefronts to the back of your mind, when you're at this point in the season and you're heading into a Six Nations, how much are you thinking about a Lions tour, if at all?
Yeah, I think you are, really. I think because you obviously without France, but you're going up against. I did used to sort of think about it. I did used to go up against, okay, I'm playing England now, whoever that may be, the nine, and if I get one up on him, then, I'm in a good place. And, you don't make it a huge focus, but it's around the corner. And, it's a massive carrot, isn't it? It's what you want. It's the best of the best. It's such an amazing tour to be on. So, yeah, it was in the forefront of my mind, and I will sort of, you playing against Scotland or Ireland or whatever, you pick them off, you try and beat your opposition, and then you've got a good opportunity to be on the tour. So I did personally used to think about it, yeah.
Ronan?
Yeah, I think that was exactly something that's not talked about probably an awful lot by current players or ex-players or something. But I would say, yeah, from 24 months out or 2 years out, you already have kind of a roadmap potentially about what you need to do to get onto the tour and who your real competitors are. Because like from 12 months to kick-off time of the tour, you're kind of either reinforcing the selector's thoughts, or you have to make a mad late push, and that's not an ideal situation to be entering it if you want to be playing in the Tests and the Lions, which after a few years you do want to be doing. So I would say all the players they'll never really admit it, but they'll be kind of, if you're ambitious and if you want to test yourself against the very best, that's exactly the tour you want to be on, and it only comes around every 4 years. So within 2 years, the most definite kind of plan about, I have to get on this tour and I'm going to do whatever it takes. As Mike says, some guys can get in there through starting in European Cup campaigns, but the easiest way is to get the better of your opponent in a test match in the Six Nations, because the Six Nations are different again to autumn internationals. So this window of 6 weeks is probably the most impressive or the most opportune time for current test players to really copper fast in their place.
Yeah, and we're heading in now, of course, to the opening weekend of the Six Nations. It is a pretty mouth-watering clash between Wales and Ireland this coming weekend. Ronan, we had you on last week talking about Jonathan Sexton's potential role within the Ireland side in a best-case scenario when Joey Carberry is fit. It's something we put to Jonathan when he was on with Gerrard on Friday night, and he was of the opinion that, listen, it's not for me to say what my role is going to be. All I have to do, or all I want to do, is keep myself fit, keep myself involved, and get as much game minutes as I possibly can, because I want to be out there. Do you understand where he's coming from on that front, that he doesn't necessarily see transition in his future?
Of course, yeah. He's controlling the controllables, and for him, that's getting the best out of his body, getting the best out of his teammates. He's the captain, he's the key man, and I think everyone in Irish rugby and associated with Irish rugby realises his importance, and his importance is probably the most important player in the next 2 month window, because when he's on the pitch, Ireland have a better chance of winning, and that's the reality. What is harder is to be able to maintain an 80-minute game week after week. That's very difficult when you push on and you hit 35 or 36, which Johnny will be soon, but it's not knocking him in anything like it. It's just when Joey Carberry isn't there, there's probably a gulf in class to the next guy, and probably for test rugby, when you need short-term results, the gulf is probably too big. But Johnny doesn't control that either. What Johnny controls is his performance and his preparation, more importantly, and he's done that impeccably for a long period of time. It's just Father Time catches everyone at a certain stage, but who's to say that it mightn't be for another 18, 24 months?
Mike, what's the realistic view from Wales on Jonathan Sexton? What did he view as his strengths and weaknesses over there?
Well, I got to play with him in Racing in France, so that was a bit of an experience. It was good. He's emotional, he's a winner, he's a competitor. So I guess he's been fantastic for Ireland for the last couple of years, and he's a director for them. He leads the ship, and he's the main man. He's the main focus. He's very emotional. I think you can probably get under his skin at times, try and knock him off his game. But yeah, he's a figure point, and I'm sure perhaps they will try and get under his skin a bit, try and rattle him a bit, get him on the floor, try and keep him out of the game, because everything goes through him. And now he's captain again. There's even more pressure on him. So I guess Wales will try and put as much pressure on him as possible, really.
Is there an over-reliance, do you think, on Sexton?
Pardon?
Is there an over-reliance on Jonathan Sexton's role on the side?
Is there a what, sorry?
Over-reliance. Do they rely too much on him?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be that great on topics of Leinster the last few months, to be honest with you, or Irish rugby in general, really. I haven't really seen much of it, but from what I know, he's a fantastic leader, but you need lots of leaders in your team as well, and that time when, talking about Rog here now, they beat us 2009 for that Grand Slam. you've got to have leaders throughout the whole team. In your pack, throughout your back line. For that comfort, for that experience. So you need to share that sort of responsibility at times. So and great sides have that. So I don't know. That's a tough question. You look at the great Irish sides. You got Rog, you had Brian, you had Paul. 3 great leaders there. I mean, they'd come together and make good decisions. If you're passionate, sometimes you can, like I used to do at times, you make the wrong decision because your passion doesn't sort of, being too passionate at times can lead you down the wrong road, and make poor decisions. But he's very experienced. He's got a wealth of experience now, and I'm sure he's got his leaders around him, with him to support him. And they're a great side. They dominated Wales's pack really in the last November series. So for me, the game, Wales really have to win ball against Ireland, otherwise they're going to struggle.
Yeah. Ronan, was he always this quiet and this cagey when you were around him in the Lions tours, Mike Phillips?
No, it's I think it's midnight in Dubai, is it? And
it is.
I don't know, was Mike up late the night before, or is he just on his way home after another night out? But no, he's perception is the same as Johnny a little bit as well. It sometimes isn't reality. I think it's hard in a snapshot sometimes to get the people, get the best out of them, and I think that's why for me and coaching Raston was so fascinating with the different people you got to meet and to really understand them and appreciate them and get to know them. And Johnny was one of them, Mike was one of them, Joe Rockakoko was one of them, and it's very, very important. I think Mike's point just about who's coming to help Johnny and who's going to 66 minutes into a game and it's an intense game, he needs those other boys stepping up to him, because there's a little bit maybe like Paulie in the fact that Paulie would be potentially known for his emotional speeches, but that's 1% of him. I think it's the same as Johnny. Johnny sometimes would be seen as a cold person, but he's incredibly warm and friendly when you actually spend time with him, and that can come out in the pitch as well. And I think it's a time for him in this Six Nations to show how good he is and how much he still has to offer, but he can also do that with the cold-blooded mentality, but with also that level of enjoyment, knowing that this doesn't last forever. And that's the discussion I'd be having with Johnny, because he is a great guy, and I think he needs to show that as well.
Getting back to that Lions tour, the World Cup in 2011, when the two of you came up against one another, I believe that was your 50th cap, Mike, that day when Wales saw off Ireland. There was something of a function afterwards, and that man in France decided to make a holy show of you on the day.
He knows it's a 50th cap.
Yeah, I mean, that was a disaster. Obviously, it was a great game for us. I managed to score as well. But yeah, it was my 50th cap, and Rog
Talk us through that try, actually. Talk us through the try, Mike.
Sorry?
Talk us through the try, please. It's not as if you don't remember it.
One of my better ones. No, well, obviously, the game was pretty good. Obviously, the try still stands, so I guess it was a try. I have lots of fun, having fun with Tommy Bowe over the years, sending him pictures pretty much every week. Afterwards, there was an after-match function, and Rog gets me up to sing, and that was a disaster. I'm not a great singer at all, so very embarrassing for me that was. But nevertheless, it was a good victory for us, and we were quite happy on the day.
Ronan, what did he sing? Or do you even remember?
No, I don't. I was red for him, though.
That's a terrible position to be trying to put somebody as, just go, sing. Mike, you could have said no.
No, it'd be a tradition. Richie. He's not giving you the full picture here. It was all set up for Mike to steal the show, but for the one time in his life, he got a little bit frightened and didn't take the open goal, because I tell you, he doesn't need a second invitation most of the time.
That was a disaster.
That's the kind of stuff that we don't like, because we hear about this Ireland-Wales rivalry and it's gone back, gone plus 15 years, and different coaches have fed into it, different players have fed into it. But there's this other side of rugby that we're not privy to, which is these functions after the matches, which is the get-togethers online, around Lion stores, etc., that kind of builds these bonds between players, Ronan, that we don't necessarily get to see the other side of. And that's what ye happen to take away from the game as much as you're playing, like the actual minutes on the pitch.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's great, because I suppose we're a bit of an odd couple, Filsey and I, but we were roommates on the Lions as well. And I kind of remember I think it was my third Lions tour in 2009, so we went into Pennyhill House to check into the hotel, so I didn't check who I was rooming with, because I kind of knew a lot of international players at that stage, and I thought it was a bit of a big dog, so okay. But it was at that stage I was kind of, I think I played Mike 3 weeks previously in a well, what game was it, Filsey? Because it couldn't have been a competitive game, because the Ospreys wouldn't have been involved at that stage, would they? So
no, when you won the Six Nations,
I went into the room and I just opened the door and just dragged in the bags, because you got all your stash, so you're delighted, so you're dragging bags with you, and in you come. And I just had a look over on the bed, and who's on the bed but Mike Phillips, and I was like, we hadn't spoken. That was probably a long time that we hadn't spoken, 3 weeks at that stage. So the two of us just broke out laughing. But I also managed that Mike was already set up, and he was, I think his bedside locker had great mementos of his loved ones, of his family. I was there, Mike. You've just left Wales 2 hours ago, and he was homesick. So he had his pictures of his loved ones all over his bedside locker. I was like, fast forward till the first piss up, and they were all knocked off. He was like, what are they doing there? I said, I didn't put them up, Mike. This is your room. So it's, he's a beauty.
Mike, you've got right to reply here. What kind of a roommate was O'Gara?
Sorry?
What kind of a roommate was Ronan?
Yeah, no, it was great times sharing with him, and we argued. I remember the 2006 game, 2009 game, going for the warm-up, and my ball went into the Irish half, so I had to run past Rog, and he gives me a lot of verbals, and I wasn't expecting it, and obviously I've gone and picked my ball up, and then I'm going back to the Wales half. So by this point, the red mist has come down on me as well, so I've given him some verbals back, and then I've gone into the change rooms and told the boys, and like all the boys are just laughing, couldn't believe it. And then then we were sharing, roommates, and we just burst out laughing straight away as I walked in the room, and then we inseparable then on the tour. So it was good times.
Ronan,
can I just go on? He's crying over there. I got to go in. I'll be 2 seconds. Okay?
You go on and take care of that. I'm going to ask Ronan here about this coming Sunday, because it is a pretty big game for both sides. Both sides have a point to prove. Johnny, when he was on Friday, said that they were pretty pleased with how their autumn went. That will kind of go against the public perception of how Ireland's autumn went, which said it was okay, fair to middling, we'll say, coming off a fair to middling year. What's your expectation of this Sunday, Ronan? How do you see Ireland setting about this game? And ultimately, we're going to work towards a kind of a score prediction on this one, but what do you want to see from Ireland this Sunday?
Yeah, there's so much in this question, which I don't think has ever been for a first-round game of Six Nations, because there's massive, I suppose, excitement. Maybe I'm overly excited because Paul is involved, and I think I know how good he is, and I know how much better he will make a lot of players. I think he has a great ability to communicate very simply and give his message very simply, which is important in rugby. And I feel that Wales are, since I've been playing professional rugby are involved in it. There's so many questions for Wales to answer that they never had. Obviously, with Warren Gatland leaving, it's a massive void, but their form has never probably had so much question marks over it, and Wales have been very, very good for a long number of years, obviously, culminating in 3 Grand Slams. But this home game for them is absolutely massive, and it's an obviously huge game for Ireland, because the first game in the Six Nations gives you momentum, as you know, and then it will fire you into a French game at home full of confidence. But if you weren't to get the result, it makes it a very difficult campaign all of a sudden, which is a horrible feeling after one game only. So I think where Ireland have got success, I think they've manhandled Wales up front, and they've got the better of them up front, and you can say that applies to every game. And I still really do believe that a solid scrum and a solid line-out and winning collisions, the back should be able to get your team over the line with that kind of a platform. I think you don't need more than parity against Wales in that regard, but I think Ireland have shone against Wales when they've decided to take them on up front, and with that will be interesting to see how they'll, I suppose, launch their maul and how they go about. I suppose they've been effective with the scrum, and 2 areas that I don't have much expertise on, admittedly, but they're areas that are hugely important to the game of rugby, and those points about being strong in your basics, coupled with a little bit of, I think, potential to play more what you see under Andy Farrell. I think that will suit Ireland well. I think hopefully I know it's early February, but the roof may be closed. If it's closed, so you can play ball, and that will suit, I suppose, teams that want to put tempo into it. And Hugo Keenan at 15, Larmer on the pitch, Earls on the pitch, Ringrose on the pitch. I think there's a lot of sprightly players that we have that we can change it up. It'll be fascinating for me just to see how they, I suppose, go about attacking. Do they try and play the ball out of the tackle, or will they play a more ruck game?
If I was to push you for a score prediction, Ronan?
I think it'll be close. I'd probably go maybe 28-22 to Ireland.
Okay, so we're looking at a high-scoring affair come Sunday. Ronan, thanks for that. We'll let you go. Mike, before you go, I just want to get a feeling and a sense of how Wales are heading into this Six Nations campaign, because obviously the last year or so hasn't been kind to Wales, particularly since the departure of Warren Gatland, but there were certainly green shoots in the autumn. Those games, both against England and against France, they may have been losing efforts, but there was enough from both to suggest that there is something stirring in that Welsh side. What are the confidence levels like from the Welsh public's perspective heading into this weekend?
Well, the levels of I don't think the fans, to be honest, would be too confident, I think. But yeah, you got to look at the regions. The regions have been pretty poor. I feel sorry for Wayne Pivac, really, because there's the base of the standard of play isn't really good enough at the minute, and that they need to up their game. But I think in terms of the November period, I think he did it as a bit of a trial period, and he sort of gave a lot of opportunities to players. Certainly, at scrum half, and I think he picked a new scrum half every single game, which you need a bit of consistency. It's so important to have that consistency at 9 and 10 in any quality side. So in order for confidence to grow and get that stability. So, I think for me, having Thomas Williams fit, I think he's going to be the first choice, and he's vital for Wales, I think. And then you've got Gareth Davies perhaps coming off the bench and being a real threat in the last he's a real match winner by himself in the last 20 minutes. So I think it'd be nice to see that sort of partnership, or that sort of those two having those roles. And I think, the Welsh back row is really good. It's strong with Josh Navidi coming back in, Tipperick and Faletau. But I guess, like I just mentioned, Ireland's pack dominated the scrum last November. So, and winning the ball in the line-up's been an issue for Wales. So, with Paul O'Connell coming into the Irish setup, it's a bit worrying for the Welsh pack in particular. But, there is some star quality there, Tips and Faletau and some real game breakers there. I'm behind as well. So, but I can't see, there hasn't been enough evidence to say that Wales are going to win this game, unfortunately. So I can see an Irish win, unfortunately.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette,